The link to the story will be in the description.
Accidental Companions by Windschild 8178. Disclaimer: I do not own Naruto. Chapter 13. Sasuke fed up. Sasuke, are you okay? Naruto's voice asked hesitantly behind him. Sasuke felt his anger spike as he spun around and glared venomously at his small blonde teammate. The Uchiha ignored the stinging in his shoulder as the object of his ire seemed to appear out of nowhere. Usually at this point the blonde would start to yell at him, but for some reason Naruto took a step back, his entire form weary. Sasuke folded his arms over his chest and smirked in contempt. Hey, screw up, Sasuke greeted coldly. At first a hurt look entered the blonde's eyes, but it quickly disappeared, as if willed to do so. Naruto eyed him carefully, his eyes now showing their confusion, before he took a step forward. What's wrong with you? Naruto asked, concern showing despite the cold welcome. Sasuke's smirk widened. What's wrong with me? Sasuke repeated quietly, his voice and features calming considerably, is none of your business. Sasuke finished, anger seeping through again. Naruto stared at him with unnerving deep blue eyes that, Sasuke thought, flashed an icy shade for a split second. He quickly dismissed it as a trick of the light. He was loud and obnoxious with a fiery temper that bordered on scary, but Naruto was never cold towards anyone. What is it? What have I done towards you for you to be such an ass to me? Why are you so angry with me all the time? What could I have possibly done to piss off your high and mighty ass? Naruto yelled. Sasuke glared back fiercely, but then his face stretched into a smile. What is it about you that bothers me so much? Sasuke tapped his finger to his chin for a moment as if contemplating it deeply. His smile turned into a deep smirk of contempt. Everything about you bothers me. The thing that bothers me most though is that I'm stuck with you as a teammate. I can't get rid of you. You mess up on a mission and I have to clean up the mess. You are too stupid to understand something in training and you drag both Sakura and I down even further than you already do. Worst of all is that you are so arrogant that you actually believe that you are on par with me. Kakashi won't even let us fight because he knows I hurt your poor little feelings when I beat you. Sasuke growled. At this point Sasuke noted that Naruto's entire body had stiffened, his face hard as stone, hands quivering in fists. It caused Sasuke to smile. He. Sasuke held his stomach lightly as he laughed harshly while Naruto just stared at him uncertainly. Come to think of it, Sasuke said softly, we were interrupted last time. Sasuke stepped forward. Naruto took several steps back. Sasuke smirked as he saw understanding in his teammate's eyes. Their fight on the hospital roof. Sakura screaming, fists flying, both bringing out their most powerful attacks in their need to show each other their strength. The realization too late that they couldn't stop their attacks and the danger they were in. Naruto took several steps back away from Sasuke and shook his head. That wasn't my choice. I didn't want to fight like that. Even now, Naruto said quietly, voice strained. Sasuke let out another harsh laugh as he moved forward and got into Naruto's face. Sasuke grabbed the front of Naruto's jacket, clenching the ridiculously stupid-looking orange coat in his hands, before lifting his light teammate a few inches from the ground. Naruto's stunned eyes staring down at him as Sasuke smirked. Who cares what you want? Sasuke asked harshly, one hand let go and pulled back, fist slamming into Naruto's stomach. Naruto's body flew back from the impact and hit the ground hard. Naruto unsteadily got to his feet, eyes filled with anger and hurt, blood dripping down his lips. What the fuck, Sasuke? What the hell is wrong with you? Naruto hissed through breaths. Sasuke walked toward him as Naruto backed up. There's no Kakashi or Sakura to break up our fight this time. There's no one to butt in like before. You've been wanting to fight too, right? Sasuke said as he swung a kick at Naruto. Naruto flipped backwards and away from Sasuke. I don't want to fight you, Sasuke. Not like this. Not out of anger. I want. Sasuke cut off Naruto's words by throwing several kunai at him. Naruto dodged to the left, kunai barely missing him, turning the fall into backflip. Sharingan eyes sprung to life. Sasuke rushed forward as Naruto landed and crouched on the ground, his right arm already pulling back. You don't have a choice in the matter. Sasuke screamed as he slammed his fist into Naruto's cheek. Sasuke frowned as Naruto moved with the punch, flipping in midair, and landed crouched once more. Something wasn't right. Naruto, despite being a complete loser, moved faster than this. Naruto wasn't nearly as fluid, fast or graceful as Sasuke, not by a long shot. Sasuke moved fast with precise movements and could easily dodge attacks. In that sense he was like a snake in the same way Naruto was like a mongoose. Naruto was unpredictable and stealthy yet possessed insanely powerful hits. The two of them complemented each other well in taijutsu styles, yet at the same time, made for fierce opponents. He sparred with Naruto enough times to know that underestimating the blonde was a bad idea. Not that he would ever tell Naruto that. That's why he noticed something was off. Naruto wasn't moving right. For a split second concern clouded the anger he felt, and for the first time he noticed Naruto looked off. Just as suddenly though a pulse ran through his shoulder and once more his anger and hatred won over. Who cared if the loser wasn't up to par? The dumbass could never beat him at 100% anyway. Sasuke, stop this. I don't want to fight you, Naruto shouted. Did his voice sound hoarse? Never mind. I didn't matter. Sasuke moved in. As Sasuke sped toward his teammate, his hands rapidly moved through hand seals. Fire style. Art of the Phoenix Flower, Sasuke thought as he took in a large breath. From his mouth several balls of fire formed and rushed toward Naruto. Leaping up into the air, high above the raging fire attack, Naruto twisted his body sideways in the beginning of a flip to land on the right side of the attack, but Sasuke appeared next to him already posed for a kick. The raven-haired boy's foot slammed into Naruto's face, sending the blonde hurtling towards the ground at a dangerous speed. Through his Sharingan, Sasuke could see Naruto gathering chakra around his body as the blonde twisted around to land on his hands and feet in a crouch position. The ground beneath him cracked a bit under the sheer amount of chakra used to soften the land. Some part of Sasuke paused as Naruto started coughing into his hands and hunched over as if in great agony. The other part though, the part being influenced by the curse mark, pushed forward and took the opportunity of Naruto being down to rush forward for another attack. Still hacking, Naruto barely managed to stand and put up a defense with his forearms, left arm over right, before Sasuke was in front of him again. Sasuke jumped up into the air and swung down with his leg, landing a strong drop kick against Naruto's raised forearms, held just over his face like a shield. Just as the hit landed, Naruto's right hand shot forward to grip Sasuke's ankle tightly. Naruto, moving his right leg back to stabilize his balance, then used all his weight to swing Sasuke's body around and let go. From the upside-down position, Sasuke shoved both hands to the ground, using chakra to protect them from scraping and his hooks to slow his slide. The moment his feet touched the ground, Sasuke shot forward again, but stopped in his tracks as his eyes scanned the training field. Dozens of Narutos surrounded him. Shadow clones, Sasuke smirked. They came at him, but he was more fluid than all of them, better than all of them, better than Naruto. He moved between their hits and dispelled all of them easily enough. Sasuke turned, fist turning and pulling back at the same time, aimed at yet another clone. Sasuke slammed his fist into its stomach only to find blood spatter across his face from Naruto coughing up blood. It was the real one. Startled, he didn't notice Naruto grip the wrist of the fist in his gut and Naruto use his free fist to slam harshly into Sasuke's face. Due to the hand on Sasuke's wrist, he wasn't able to roll with the attack and thus took the full brunt of one of Naruto's powerful punches. Sasuke's head snapped back from the impact before his body was pinned to the ground by Naruto. Did that wake you up? Naruto yelled hoarsely in his face. Sasuke tried to get up, but Naruto had both his shoulders pinned with his knees. Another punch slammed into Sasuke's cheek. He spit blood at Naruto, the red liquid landing across the younger boy's nose. Naruto gripped the front of his shirt tightly. What is it going to take to get you to stop treating me like I'm lower than you? Naruto asked bluntly. There you go, being arrogant again. You will never be equal to me. Sasuke spat. Sasuke, I don't want to fight you, we're teammates. Let's just talk, alright? Naruto pleaded. Talk? About what? You can never understand me because you were alone from the very beginning. You don't understand what it's like to have parents or brothers. You don't understand anything. To have those bonds ripped from you by your very own brother. You could never understand that. You were alone from the very beginning. Sasuke screamed. Sasuke slammed his forehead into Naruto's and rolled away when Naruto stood up holding his head in pain. Apparently at some point during their tussle Naruto's headband had come loose and slid down around his neck. It had been Sasuke's forehead protector against Naruto's bare skull. Blood dripped down from a nasty gash into the blonde's eyes. Naruto frantically wiped at his eyes, blood covering his hands and face, while Sasuke regained his standing position. You are nothing but a worthless loser who can never do anything right. You screw up everything for our team. Every mission we go on you always manage to mess it up one way or another. Why don't you just give up being a shinobi? Sasuke demanded cruelly. Naruto stilled in his movements of dashing blood from his eyes, the words apparently having an effect on him. Sasuke took the opening. He moved in and swept Naruto's feet from under him. The blonde fell forward, but moved his hands in front of him so that he landed on all four rather than his face. Instead of moving though, the blonde was uncharacteristically still. For a moment Sasuke wondered if he'd gone too far in his insults. Pain shot through the curse seal again though and washed away his soft thoughts. Sasuke continued, you will never amount to anything. Not Hokage, not Anbu or Junin. You'll always just be a pathetic genin. You know why? Because no one would ever want someone like you to be Hokage. No one would ever trust you with such a difficult job. A weak, unbearably stupid, no talent idiot who only has dumb luck going for him. Naruto still hadn't moved and this time the sight caused him to smirk. Naruto's stillness didn't last long though because Sasuke was right there in an instant and slammed his foot right into Naruto's chest. A scream of pure agony ripped from Naruto's throat as the blonde landed hard on the ground clutching the area over his heart. Naruto's body jerked sharply as if a shot of electricity touched him, tears unwillingly slipping from the corner of his eyes, hands shaking horribly. Naruto carefully got to his feet, bangs shadowing his eyes, right hand still clenching the front of his shirt. Does it make you feel better, Sasuke? Does punching me make you feel better than me, stronger than me? Does hitting me and insulting your worthless teammate take the pain of losing your family away? Naruto whispered hoarsely. Sasuke felt his anger boil over. How dare you talk about my family as if you know anything? You're nothing but a worthless orphan. You don't know anything about losing something important to you because you've never had anything important. Sasuke yelled as he ran forward, twisted his body into a full round kick. Naruto hit the ground and got up again. This time Naruto whispered, but Sasuke heard perfectly all the same. I bet they're really proud of you, Sasuke. Sasuke, the last of the great Uchiha clan, beating up a no-name orphan because he's having a tantrum. Naruto spat out a clump of blood with his words. Still his eyes stayed hidden behind his long blonde bangs. Sasuke moved forward, anger consuming him beyond all reason, pounding his fists into Naruto as hard as he could. It didn't matter where his hits landed as long as they did. Naruto had crossed the line. He never noticed that Naruto wasn't fighting back. When Sasuke finally fell to the ground in exhaustion, his mind seemed to be finally clearing. He idly noticed that the marks that he hadn't known had even appeared was moving back into the curse seal. The pain in his shoulder slowly started to recede until it was no longer there at all. Sasuke sighed in relief. Why didn't it paralyze me like all the other times? Sasuke thought in confusion. He felt so calm. He hadn't felt calm in weeks. His anger and jealousy had been overwhelming him till he was a bundle of nerves and tension. Suddenly it was all just gone. It was then that he noticed how bloody his knuckles were. It was then he heard the sound of coughing. That's right, he'd been fighting Naruto. It was Naruto who he'd been so unbelievably angry with all this time. Sasuke looked up and towards the area where the coughing sound was coming from and saw Naruto. Not just saw Naruto, but really took a look at Naruto for the first time in weeks. Sasuke felt shame flood him at the sight of his teammate. Naruto's face was bloody. Already a large dark bruise was forming on his right cheek and the side of his left eye. His jacket was pulled so far right he could see the blonde's shoulder and the darkening skin. Sasuke gasped for air as he saw further. For several weeks he'd been so filled with rage that he blocked out everything outside that anger. Now when he looked at Naruto he saw how his clothes were hanging off of him, looser than before, even though Sasuke knew that Naruto had been outgrowing them several weeks ago. The weight loss scared Sasuke. There were rings too, deep sleepless rings around Naruto's eyes, and pale skin. Naruto had always been tanner than anyone he knew, and his eyes, they were dull even while tears poured from them. Naruto, Sasuke whispered. Naruto's hoarse voice interrupted him. I'm sorry that I'm not the teammate you wanted. I'm sorry I'm not a genius or talented in any way. I'm sorry I always screw up our missions. Naruto choked and coughed harshly. I know I'm not a good ninja, but... Naruto stumbled as he tried to get up and spit out more blood. But I don't need you telling me how worthless I am when I'm already well aware of it. Naruto said as he finally stood up. Sasuke stared, absolutely stunned by Naruto's words. Naruto, Sasuke again tried to apologize. Shut up, I'm done, I'm tired, I've had the worst godforsaken couple weeks of my life. Just, screw you, there, I said it, screw you, screw Kakashi, screw Sakura. I don't care anymore, Naruto screamed, his voice cracking. Naruto turned and limped away. Wait, Naruto, Sasuke screamed, but Naruto started running, despite his limp, and was soon out of sight. Sasuke fell to his knees, gripping his shoulder tightly as the curse mark pulsed again. A tiny part of the anger from before returned, but Sasuke squashed it mercilessly. Sasuke wouldn't let it consume him again. He needed to talk to the Hokage. He refused to let this thing take control of him like that ever again. Sasuke felt a shiver run through him as he thought of Naruto. Guilt reared its head like an ugly beast. Naruto ran as fast and as far as he could from Sasuke, ignoring the pain that racked his body as he did so, ignoring Sasuke's voice calling out to him. Finally, several blocks from his apartment in one of the side alleys, Naruto stumbled and scraped his knees against the ground. As they sluggishly bled, Naruto gingerly pushed himself up and against the sidewall, bringing his legs up to his chest. Naruto wrapped his arms around his knees and sobbed. He couldn't take it anymore. Never mind, I know exactly what's wrong with you. You're selfish and arrogant and always try to be the center of attention. You're nothing like Sasuke and will never be as good as Sasuke. You are nothing but a worthless loser who can never do anything right. You screw up everything for our team. Every mission we go on you always manage to mess it up one way or another. Why don't you just give up being a shinobi? You will never amount to anything. Not Hokage, not Anbu or Junin. You'll always just be a pathetic genin. You know why? Because no one would ever want someone like you to be Hokage. No one would ever trust you with such a difficult job. A weak, unbearably stupid, no talent idiot who only has dumb luck going for him. He could feel Kyuubi's chakra working its way through his system already, healing the damage as if it were never there, all except where Sasuke kicked him in the chest. Sasuke had hit directly over his heart where his inner Biju chakra couldn't touch. The pain was intense and he stayed as still as possible, tears still streaming down his face. Silently he forced more of the red chakra through his system. If Shizune noticed anything when he came to the apartment, he could blame it on a tussle. There wouldn't be enough damage left for her to assume anything else. He couldn't take any of it anymore. If they didn't want anything to do with him, that was fine. The moment everything was healed, he'd go to Tsunade and ask to be removed from the team. He would do D-rank solos until the Chunin exam, sign up with Sasuke and Sakura, and then never see them again the moment they were promoted. It wasn't like it was a surprise. Sasuke and Sakura had never liked him from the start. At one point during the Chunin exams he'd stupidly thought they could be friends, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. He would be just fine doing solo missions. After all, he wasn't completely alone. He had Iruka, Konohamaru, Moegi, Udon, Shizune and Tsunade, and Jiraiya when the old man was around. He would do just fine. He didn't need Garuko to talk to. He didn't need a dog's company. The dog would go back to Kakashi and everything would be fine. He would take missions and train and water his plants just like he did before the stupid mud got involved. He wouldn't miss Garuko, or Sasuke or Sakura or Kakashi. So what if he'd liked the few rare times that the three of them hung out, like at the picnic? So what if he'd ask shamelessly every day if they'd like to hang out again? So what if he enjoyed hearing Kakashi's lectures and war stories? So what if he silently was hurt that no one on his team said happy birthday to him? So what if they constantly insulted him and treated him like dirt? He didn't care. So what if they were the first and only people his own age that he'd ever come close to calling friends? He'd been expecting this for a long time now. He knew that Sasuke and Sakura could do 10 times better with pretty much anyone as a teammate. He knew that they would soon grow tired of him constantly messing up. He knew that they would abandon him, and he was perfectly fine with that knowledge, with that understanding, so it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt at all. Damn his stupid heart, it was acting up again, that was all. The feeling that someone had ripped it out and stomped on it wasn't due to his teammates, it was due to the damage. At least that's what he told himself as he stayed there sobbing for several hours. It was Friday afternoon, and Jiraiya the Toad Sage cackled happily as he flipped through the pictures of half-naked women he'd managed to take from his latest research trip. His nose bled at the plump breast that was only just contained by the young woman's towel. Yes, it had been very successful indeed. He just needed to drop off his more serious information to Tsunade, and then he'd take a long, hot relaxing soak in the wonderful hot springs of Konoha. He was a week and a half late, so he imagined Tsunade would be pissed at him. An unpleasant thought, but it wouldn't be the first time though. He also needed to talk to Naruto. He would be telling the boy about the 2-year trip he planned with the boy to train him up in order to face Akatsuki. He planned to leave in a few weeks. Jiraiya's mind was already picking out the best training spots that he knew of in the elemental nations to bring Naruto to. Speak of the devil, Jiraiya muttered with a grin as he spotted the orange coat that belonged to his student. Naruto's back was to him, walking in the same direction toward the Hokage Tower, with one of Kakashi's dogs beside him. Trying to seem as cool and casual to his godson as he could, Jiraiya quickened his pace and looked straight ahead when he reached Naruto's side. "So, long time no see, huh, squirt?" Jiraiya asked teasingly. Naruto stopped and turned to him, causing the man to choke on the air he was breathing. Holy shit, Jiraiya thought in shock as he looked over his student. Naruto was trying to smile, but it turned into more of a grimace. Naruto was already such a little thing that the weight loss was like a slap in the face. If he had to take a guess, he would say the boy lost a good 10 pounds off his frame since the last time he had seen him. The boy was pale, and it looked as if he hadn't slept in a while with how dark the rings under his eyes were. "Hey you old perv, how's it going?" Naruto asked, avoiding eye contact with him. "Fine. So, why's Kakashi's dog with you?" Jiraiya asked, avoiding the questions he wanted to ask. Naruto looked down at Garuko, then up at Jiraiya with a strained smile. "I'm watching him for Kaka-sensei this month. He should be back in a week or so. We just got back from a visit with Ruchi Yamanaka to pick up some seeds," Naruto told him. For a split second, Naruto appeared to be staring at Garuko with what the old man thought was regret, but it quickly disappeared. Jiraiya dismissed it as a trick of the light. It was painfully boring. We were there forever while Naruto was picking out what seeds he wanted. If you ask me, Naruto has already got too many of those silly green things, Garuko whined. Jiraiya nodded, his eyes still focused on his ill-looking student, deciding that he would be discussing more with Tsunade than just the information he brought. Jiraiya hummed, absently noting the slightly sunken look of Naruto's face, not to mention the bandages he could see peeking out slightly under the boy's headband. "So why are you going to Tsunade's office?" Jiraiya asked casually, hoping Naruto would slip up somewhere and give him a hint as to what was going on. The man would never openly search for information. He knew from years of experience, the best way to get info was to gather it from a wide berth of people and never from the source itself. Naruto gave him a sideways glance as he started walking again before frowning at him a bit. "That's between me and Tsunade," Naruto told him bluntly. Ouch, Jiraiya thought, touchy. "Well, I need to talk to Tsunade too, and you as well. Feel like hanging around afterwards so we can talk?" Jiraiya asked. Naruto shrugged. "'Fraid I need a yes or no, kiddo," Jiraiya said pointedly. Naruto sighed. "Sure," Naruto finally replied as they entered through the double doors of the tower. "And since I was obviously first, I'll go in first," Naruto finished cheekily as he ran in front of the man. Jiraiya grinned in relief. At least some of his Naruto was still there, even if worn out. Naruto said something to the dog, who huffed in reply, but nodded, and sat outside the door. Jiraiya moved more slowly than his blonde student and opted to sit on one of the cushiony chairs outside Tsunade's door. "So you're one of Kakashi's dogs, hum?" Jiraiya asked conversationally. "Yes," Garuko answered with a huff as he laid down. "So mind telling me why Naruto looks so thin? I certainly didn't leave him like that," Jiraiya asked. "Kid's been sick with the flu for the last couple weeks," Garuko answered with a yawn. "Flu?" Jiraiya asked. "What kind of flu lasts weeks?" Jiraiya thought. "Yeah, Shizune treated him and has been making Naruto dinner the past week," the dog answered. Jiraiya leaned back in his chair, his old bones sagging against the pillows, before letting out a breath of air. Something was up. "You want to do what?" Tsunade asked quietly. She briefly pondered that her hearing must be going in her old age because surely Naruto wasn't asking for what she thought he was asking for. She scanned over Naruto's body, noting that Shizune had not been exaggerating about the degree to which Naruto had been sick. Her eyes hovered over the area where Naruto's heart was located. The boy had obviously been under a great deal of stress lately, there was no doubt about that, but to ask for this? "I want to transfer out of Team 7 and do solo work. I'll even go to the next Chunin exam with them, but I think it would be better for everyone if I worked somewhere else for now," Naruto said calmly, though she noted his voice was hoarse. Tsunade stared wide-eyed at him. Naruto, the person who, with Jiraiya, tracked her down with the sole intent of healing his teammates Kakashi and Sasuke. The person who, if what her Chunin told her was correct, fought to chakra exhaustion against the Sans Jinchuriki to protect Sasuke and Sakura. The person who was filled with so much praise for Kakashi and Sakura. This Naruto was asking her to be transferred out of his team? Tsunade tapped the table in thought. "Why this sudden change of heart?" Tsunade asked, grimacing at her unfortunate use of words. Naruto didn't even blink. Naruto's hands were behind his back, but being the medical kunoichi she could tell by the tightness of his shoulders that he had his hands clasped together tightly, a show of extreme tension. The young teen's eyes were shadowy, an edge of eyes she hadn't seen before there, the blue flashing between deep dark ocean blue and extreme light icy blue before her very eyes. "It's not a change of heart. It's not like I suddenly don't care about them, it's just a change in circumstances. I think it would be better if I took solo missions because of Konoha's economic situation. You need more of your Chunin and Junin on missions, right? Gigi taught me a lot about filling out paperwork in the office, so I think I would be of better use filing mission reports and such while the more advanced shinobi take higher missions. Plus with my shadow clone jutsu you wouldn't need to keep so many higher class shinobi working in the office," Naruto explained carefully. After all, he had been planning his negotiation for the transfer for a while, even if it was faster than he expected. Tsunade leaned back in her seat, silently stunned by Naruto's brilliant idea. Her mind was going through the implications. She would have to test Naruto's office skills of course, but she doubted Naruto was lying about Sarutobi teaching him. After all, the reports said they were close before the old man died. With the shadow clone Tsunade would be able to have 15 extra Chunin and 2 more Junin doing missions. She might even be able to push some of her work into Naruto's hands after a while. Not to mention it was the perfect way to prepare the brat for her position. It would also help Naruto in that he could relax his body while his heart recovered from the surgery she and Shizune had been planning. It was turning out to be the best solution all around. Still, it bothered her that Naruto would want to transfer so bad. There was one other thing. In order to receive a transfer you need to gain the permission of your team leader, Kakashi Hatake, who is to arrive in a week or so. Tsunade began, watching as Naruto's face fell. "Furthermore, I will have to test out your skills in this office for the next week or so before I can give my permission," Tsunade continued warmly. "And this way I can get you to eat a big lunch while Shizune handles dinner." He really is way too thin, Tsunade thought with a grimace. Naruto broke out in a huge grin. "Thank you Oba-chan," Naruto told her sincerely. Tsunade shook her head at him before shooing him out. "I'll see you on Monday at 7 sharp, brat," Tsunade called back playfully. Jiraiya walked in, eyes following Naruto as the blonde left, before turning to her with a frown etched on his features. Tsunade sighed. When Jiraiya exited the office, he offered his student a grin before motioning the boy to follow him. Naruto quietly followed without protest. Garuko yawned and stretched, pattering alongside the blonde. Jiraiya headed to the park and picked out one of his favorite spots, high up and circular with railing to keep the kiddies from tripping over the steep edge, and sat down on a bench. Naruto crouched down toward Garuko and whispered something in the dog's ear. The dog let out a soft growl, but nonetheless, trotted away and lay down under a nearby tree. Jiraiya frowned at the scene. I've never heard of any of Kakashi's dogs being so easy to command, Jiraiya commented. Naruto sat down without a word. The kid wouldn't look at him, his stare fixated off in the distance, and just shrugged in response. Jiraiya fiddled with the hem of his coat as his mind attempted to assimilate the information he'd gathered from Tsunade and attempted to come up with a way to broach the topic tactfully. Unfortunately, he couldn't think of any way to do that. Tsunade told me about your heart, and what happened before, Jiraiya murmured, eyes carefully observing his student for a reaction. Naruto turned himself further away from him until his orange-covered back was to him. Naruto didn't say anything in reply, but there was an evident tenseness in his shoulders. She also told me about what your chakra was doing before Shizune saw you and that Shizune believes you know what the cause of it was. Jiraiya said a bit louder. I don't know what caused it. What else did you want to talk about other than what Tsunade told you? Naruto asked. Jiraiya frowned down at the boy. Do you plan on avoiding the topic the entire time? Jiraiya asked bluntly. It's between me and Tsunade, and I'm dealing with it just fine, so there's nothing to talk about, Naruto stated. Jiraiya couldn't help but feel slighted that Naruto wasn't willing to talk to his own sensei about something so important. More than that though, he felt angry at himself for not noticing that his new student had been in pain. There were other things that were bothering him as well though. Tsunade's worried that some of the damage in your heart may have only been noticed by Shizune last week because it wasn't caused by your heart damage all those years ago, but rather it was Kabuto when he attacked the muscles around your heart, Jiraiya said quietly. Jiraiya watched Naruto's body jerk, startled. She says she's thinking of coming over to your home today instead of waiting till Monday like planned, the white-haired man continued. He watched as Naruto stilled. It was a bluff, of course. Tsunade had a group of ambassadors from several of the smaller countries that she'd been dealing with in trade negotiations for more than a week. It was the main reason she hadn't been more aggressive in her watch of Naruto. You know what I think though? I don't think Kabuto did anything. I think it really is damage that was never fixed, and I think you've been purposely hiding it all these years, Jiraiya said quietly. Why would you think that? Naruto asked. Jiraiya looked at Naruto grimly. When I trained you for the finals and when we were traveling together in search of Tsunade, there was something you kept doing that I dismissed as unimportant. I thought it was just a strange habit because you never showed any indication that you were in pain. Now I'm regretting it. Naruto, you kept gripping your jacket tightly over the spot where your heart is. I understand that you were afraid of the hospital, but that's still no excuse for not telling anyone that your heart is hurting you. The damage could have been a lot worse than what Shizune found, and you could be dead because you didn't want to say anything, Jiraiya said, his voice laced with cold anger. Naruto merely shrugged at the man. What would have complaining done? Shizune told me that she and Tsunade were going to pay for the operation, but what would I have done beforehand? I can't afford going to the hospital. I definitely can't afford an operation. What would have been the point in whining about something that you can't fix? It's not like anyone before Shizune ever offered to help me with anything, Naruto asked. Besides that, I honestly didn't know that my heart was the problem, Naruto admitted. The blonde pulled his legs onto the bench and against his chest while Jiraiya just stared at Naruto's back. So what, you just ignored it when you were in pain or sick? Jiraiya asked incredulously. Naruto shrugged indifferently. And what do you mean no one ever offered you help? What about me and Kakashi? Jiraiya shouted indignantly. At this, Naruto laughed long and hard. It took several minutes for the small shinobi to calm down enough to talk again. Kaka-sensei never even wanted me as a student. I overheard the council talking once about how I was put on Kakashi's team cause I was a Jinchuriki. They wanted to keep their little monster safe in case a war ever got started between us and another hidden village. And, if you remember correctly, I had to force you to teach me anything when we first met. Besides that fact, don't you remember the deal we had? I'm the student and you're the teacher. Nothing more and nothing less. You're not supposed to offer me help. I'm supposed to figure it all out for myself. Naruto pointed out softly. Jiraiya's features darkened. Naruto stood up from the bench and shoved his hands in his pockets, still keeping his back turned to the Sannin. So what is it you wanted to talk to me about, old perv? Besides the medical stuff, Naruto asked. The Sannin noted with a grimace how Naruto spoke so casually about the council's opinion of him. It was an uncomfortably blunt indication of normalcy. Jiraiya looked good and hard at his pupil as he tried to figure out how long the blonde had kept such thoughts as truths. Just because the council placed you on Kakashi's team to protect you doesn't mean Kakashi didn't want you, Naruto. Jiraiya insisted quietly. Naruto shrugged with obvious disbelief. And besides that, I took you on as my full-fledged student because I wanted you as my student. Jiraiya slipped in casually. Naruto's entire frame froze before the blonde turned toward him with a questioning gaze, a small tiny spark of light erupting in the icy blue. Jiraiya grinned cheekily. That's right, brat. As of today you are officially my apprentice, the white-haired man declared. Naruto stared at him. Really? You really mean it? Naruto asked, utterly stunned. Come on, brat, when have I ever lied? Jiraiya asked cheekily. Naruto's sweat dropped. You want a list? Hey, I resent that. Yeah, and I resent 2 out of the 3 Sannin stealing my money and flicking me on the forehead. Get over it. Garuko had a headache, a small incessant tinge at the back of his head that had been steadily growing since Thursday. He would bet money on those stupid flowers at the Yamanaka compound was the cause of it. The horrible, over-smelly flowers had been in full bloom despite the approaching frost of mid-November, and it had been horrible. As far as he could remember anyway. For some reason the meeting with the twitchy-eyed Yamanaka seemed hazy. His instincts were telling him that something was drastically wrong, but what that something was he had not the faintest idea. And then there was Naruto. For the past 3 weeks Naruto had lived up to everything he'd told Kakashi the idiot would be. Loud and obnoxious with a habit of tripping over his own feet, it hadn't surprised him the least. Despite the blonde's motherly care over his sea of plant life in the apartment, there was nothing interesting about the blonde in the least. Until Thursday, when they'd exited the compound of the Yamanakas, the blonde seemed strangely different from the past 3 weeks. Naruto grinned down at him and talked his ear off about how he planned to blow everyone away during the next Chunin exam that Team 7 was going to enter. It was normal behavior, but it seemed wrong. Naruto was nervous about something. The dog immediately picked up that emotion, but it still didn't tell him what the genin was nervous about. Garuko also noticed with worry that Naruto's entire body moved, yet with such tenseness he seemed ready to spring into action at any moment. The Naruto that he knew from the past 3 weeks hadn't shown any of that. That's about when he started to get the headache. Alarm bells were going off. Instincts howling. The dog sniffed the air and strained his ears as he searched for an enemy but couldn't find one. Never before had he been faced with not knowing why he felt as if something was immensely wrong. Normally this intense feeling came just before a battle. They were in the middle of Konoha, though, with not an enemy in sight or smell. Just in case, he stood on alert. 2 days later, in the early afternoon of Saturday, the dog was not so alert. When Naruto left the house that afternoon claiming he had something he needed to do, Garuko had tried to go with him. He wasn't sure why he felt such a strong desire to stay with the blonde, but for some reason he knew it was important. Naruto just grinned and wrinkled his nose at the dog, pointing to his bed. You've got a headache, right? Go lie down, Naruto told the dog sternly. Garuko had been indignant, with good reason, telling him to go lie down as if he was some pet. Garuko had shot his head up to show his indignation, only to whine and put his head back down when his headache reminded him of its presence. Naruto gave him a sympathetic look and gently rubbed his head for a brief moment, briefly alleviating the pressure. Garuko's ears moved down as he craned into the touch. The next thing he knew, Naruto turned away from him and disappeared out the door. Garuko sighed and reluctantly did as he was told. Garuko nosed the blanket and snuggled underneath it, his body grateful for the warmth, mind thankful for the darkness. Kakashi would be back in about a week if there was no complications in the mission. Naruto was a nice person and he may have been far more quiet the last couple days, but that didn't make up for the last 3 weeks. Garuko grimaced. Another spike of pain. He wished he knew why it wouldn't go away. Chapter 14. Ino's Brilliant Prank. Shikamaru Nara rubbed his forehead much in the same manner as a certain Chunin instructor back in his academy days. 7 days. They had been trying to find and talk to Naruto for 7 long days. The genius had come to a very rational and well thought out conclusion. Everyone was conspiring against them. It was the only plausible explanation for how they'd missed the small genin at every turn. They'd gone to the training grounds where Team 7 met early Tuesday only to find that the blonde never showed up and left a furious Sakura. They decided to wait till later after training before going to the ramen stand where Naruto was known to frequent. After that came up empty. They'd been forced to ask around for an address to where Naruto lives. When their search came up unsuccessful, they gave up for the night. Wednesday they finally caught someone who not only knew where Naruto lived, but also knew that Naruto would be at the academy the next day for a shinobi life lecture, Konohamaru. So they arrived at the academy on Thursday, but Naruto never showed up. It was almost funny to see Konohamaru spout a fit nearly as bad as Sakura's. It worried them though that Naruto hadn't showed up when he promised he would. Naruto didn't break promises without a really good reason. Friday they'd gone to his apartment only to find he wasn't home and then to the missions desk to discover he'd just finished a meeting with Tsunade. They then ran into Jiraiya, who said he'd just talked to Naruto not but 30 minutes beforehand and that the blonde was on his way home. They'd rushed off toward their friend's home only to find Naruto had not gone home. It was at this point that the Nara was considering the idea that perhaps Naruto somehow knew they wanted to talk to him and had been purposely avoiding them all week. Choji slumped onto the bench in front of the shady store they'd stopped in front of after they'd checked Naruto's apartment again. After which the duo proceeded to turn in the wrong direction and got lost. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered as he peered up at the darkening sky. It was late Sunday and his mother would be expecting him home soon. Shikamaru sighed loudly and was about to sit down when someone bumped into him. Shikamaru stumbled back in surprise. A hand shot out and steadied him even as Choji was standing. Shikamaru followed the arm to find a young boy, younger than himself at least, dressed in black pants and a long-sleeved black shirt. A black bandana hid his hair, if he had any, and black bandages covered him beneath his eyes to just above his chin. Sorry, I'm late for work," the boy said as he made to hurry on his way. Shikamaru saw only the briefest flash of blue before the boy turned from him. Suddenly the boy stilled with a foot still in the air as if Shikamaru stopped him with one of his shadow jutsu. The boy lowered his foot to the ground and turned slightly, peering at him and Choji as if they were circus attractions, before he came full circle. "What?" Choji asked as the big teen looked down at himself. "What are clan brats doing in this neighborhood? Got lost?" the boy asked. Shikamaru noted with curiosity that there was no animosity when he asked, merely a tinge of confusion. Choji sputtered indignantly. "Sort of," Shikamaru admitted with a sigh. "We were looking for a friend and lost our way." The boy nodded his head in thought. "Maybe if you tell me who you're looking for I can help you out," the boy said. "We're looking for Naruto Uzumaki. Have you heard of him?" Shikamaru asked. The boy stared at him, longer than was comfortable, before slowly nodding. "He lives in the Lamplighters apartment complex," the boy answered hesitantly. "We know that. He's not there. Do you know where he might be?" Shikamaru asked. "No idea. He should be in the Hokage's tower all day tomorrow though," said something about filing. The boy said with a shrug. The boy turned and began walking away. "Wait," Shikamaru called out. The boy stilled in surprise. "What?" There was an unrecognizable edge to the boy's voice. "How do we get to the main marketplace from here?" Shikamaru asked. "So why exactly are you going to be working in the office this week?" Garuko asked in confusion. The dog walked beside Naruto along the side streets leading up to the Hokage Tower. For some reason or another Naruto seemed to avoid the main street like the plague. Even though the main street was the easiest way to get to the Inuzuka compound, Naruto had dragged them through a dozen side streets around the road to get to it instead. When questioned about the action, Naruto just shrugged and said it was quieter. The loudest genin walking down side streets because they were quieter? Garuko refrained from asking the blonde to elaborate. He had this strange feeling that it would only make his headache worse. I'm going because Ba-chan wants to test how much filing can get done with the use of shadow clones. You're coming because you insisted on accompanying me all day long, Naruto explained calmly despite the fact that the dog had asked the same question 3 times that morning. After all, calmly didn't necessarily mean patiently. The dog snorted as he looked up at Naruto with his eyes squinted. Why have you been so quiet this weekend? Even when you had the flu you were talkative, Garuko asked. I don't know, I've just been annoying you, so I thought it would be better to give you a break before Kakashi gets here, Naruto replied absent-mindedly. Garuko paused as his headache spiked and an image of the blonde in front of him came to mind. But this one was of Naruto standing subconsciously in front of the Inuzuka's main doors, arms gently squeezing him as a young woman answered the door. Hana. Hey, I got a deal for you. If I totally embarrass myself or I'm doing something wrong and I don't know it, pretend you're having a horrible stomachache so that we can go home, okay? Garuko blinked as Naruto's voice drifted to his ears. But one look at the blonde beside him told the dog that Naruto hadn't spoken. Where had that come from? Garuko continued to walk, eyes wandering over to the blonde from time to time, and attempting to put down the newly risen headache. Why had it come back? He'd finally gotten rid of it sometime Saturday morning. A thought suddenly struck him along with a spike in pain. When did I start talking to Naruto? The dog thought long and hard as they walked, and yet he couldn't come up with an answer. Not only could he not remember when he started talking to the genin, but he couldn't remember why he'd started talking. The two made it to the tower without incident. Garuko watched Naruto knock on the door and smiled as a string of vile curses rang through the air from the newly risen Tsunade. It was early, really early, 7 o'clock early. Naruto smiled cheerfully. Naruto opened the door and Garuko took the liberty of prancing in first to see the grumpy Hokage. For some reason, despite the fact that Garuko was not an early riser, he'd not been bothered by having to get up so early. Garuko looked around and was confused when he didn't see Tsunade behind her desk. The dog's eyes wandered around the room and snickered when they landed on the haggard Hokage sitting up from the couch in the corner, hair sticking out from odd angles, clothes rumpled. Morning, Ba-chan, Naruto called in a loud, cheerful voice. Tsunade rubbed her eyes with her right hand while rolling and massaging her shoulders with her left. Tsunade spoke in a hoarse whisper. Brat, I've spent the last 48 hours performing emergency surgery on 2 newbie Anbu brats who didn't think that an assassination target would have equally powerful guards. Lower your voice. Right, Naruto chirped with a salute. Tsunade groaned as she stretched and yawned. She blinked a few times and gave her office a searching look before sweeping across the room and digging into her cabinet. The aging woman pulled out a can-sized bottle of sake before putting her lips to her mouth and making a shushing sound to the two. Garuko snickered. Naruto gave her an amused sigh of exasperation. All right, Naruto, Tsunade started as she tipped the small bottle back and took a swig. We've got a couple of things to talk about today before you start your qualification week. You will be working directly under Shizune and will report to her at all times. Garuko frowned as he listened, confusion marring his face. Qualifications for what? Garuko spoke up. Naruto fidgeted nervously and refused to look at the dog, which immensely confused him. Tsunade too frowned. Naruto, haven't you informed your team or Garuko? Tsunade asked. Naruto shook his head. Qualifications for what? Garuko repeated. If Naruto does well in this preliminary run for clone filing, then I'll be keeping Naruto as a permanent part of the office staff. He will be removed from Kakashi's team with the exception of participating in the next Chunin exam. Of course, this means we'll be missing Naruto for a while because of his trip with Jiraiya in a few short months, but I'd rather have all the qualification stuff done before he goes. Tsunade answered. Garuko's head spiked again, only worse this time. An image of Naruto lying on the floor of the bathroom flashed through his head and disappeared again before he could grasp it. Words whispered in his pointed ears. I'm sorry. For what? Garuko shook his head roughly and a whine escaped through his black-rimmed lips. Why wouldn't his head stop hurting? What were the images he couldn't seem to remember? Garuko? Naruto's voice came again. Garuko laid down and whined. Was it really his voice or another vision? Hands reached out and gently massaged his head. The small fingers felt like a cool rush of water to his aching skull. The arms picked him up and held him to somebody's chest. I'm sorry, Naruto whispered into his ears. Just don't try to remember. He knew. Garuko knew that was Naruto's real voice. Garuko whined as he was set down on a couch. He was only minimally aware that it was outside of the office that he was placed. Shush, just go to sleep, Garuko. Kakashi will be back soon and your headaches will go away. They won't ever bother you again, Naruto told him. Fingertips touched his forehead again and what felt like water rushed over him. The water enraptured him in a blissful and painless darkness that protected him, but for some reason he didn't want to go. Garuko fell asleep. Naruto walked back into the office where Tsunade stood with an eyebrow quirked. Naruto shrugged nonchalantly before explaining. He's been having nasty headaches lately. Hana said they were caused by the operation needed for his leg and that they'll go away soon. The blonde easily lied as he sat back in one of the guest chairs. Tsunade nodded her head in understanding. There were a number of medications used on animals that had such side effects after an operation. Shizune will fill you in on everything else when she gets here, but for now I would like to take a diagnosis for your heart. Tsunade gently prodded. And I need you to remove your jacket and shirt. In-depth diagnosis requires skin contact with the area of concern. Naruto fiddled with the hem of his jacket as he let the words sink in. It was Tsunade, the woman he saw as a big sister or even as a motherly figure, but it was still an immensely uncomfortable thought. The only time he'd been in any state of undress in the presence of a female was. Hesitantly he unzipped and shrugged out of his jacket before more carefully pulling his shirt over his head. Naruto looked away as the developing blush on his cheeks darkened. He didn't want to see her face when she looked at him because even if she wasn't Zain he knew that he would probably freak out. Naruto took a deep breath to steady his nerves as he stared down at the tiled floor. It was a completely different situation, but the familiar rise of shame and helplessness came over him and he had to struggle to not let those emotions show on his face. He heard Tsunade's throat hitch as she took in his body and unintentionally flinched. What is she thinking? Naruto wondered worriedly. His fingers tugged at the edge of the jacket laying on his lap and Naruto was forced to still them when warm fingers touched his stomach. Naruto felt the urge to spring back or push her away, but with hard-won control managed to beat back the feeling. Tsunade's fingers traced his ribs, touching each one as if she were counting them, before finally resting on the area over his heart. A sudden warmth spread across his chest and Naruto guessed that she'd begun the diagnosis jutsu. The older and younger blonde stayed in that position for nearly 15 minutes before the green chakra died down and disappeared. Tsunade let out a shaky breath as she removed her hands from Naruto's chest. You can put your shirt back on, Naruto, Tsunade informed him. Naruto nodded without looking at her and quickly slipped his shirt back on. With his chest covered, Naruto finally found he could look in Tsunade's direction. The woman's face was stony and she appeared to be in deep thought. The silence that filled the room caused Naruto to fidget, his foot pressing down and heel lifting, hand unconsciously moving up to rub the back of his neck. Tsunade bit her lip and sighed heavily. Naruto, did anything happen about 2 or 3 years ago? Tsunade asked. Naruto jerked in surprise. His foot stopped moving. His hand fell to his side. Blue eyes simply widened before narrowing before his body stiffened. No, nothing happened. Where did that come from? How could something that happened years ago be affecting my heart now? Naruto asked, a touch of anger in his voice. Tsunade bit the tip of her thumb as she looked through her wide-open windows. A cool breeze battered the glass panes on either side so that a rhythmic thumping noise reverberated through the office. The diagnosis of your heart told me that the damage after your operation was nearly non-existent. In the interrogation with Ibiki, it was found that the doctor assumed that you wouldn't have been able to survive the horrible experience and would have died during surgery. Apparently the doctor back then thought that as long as no one found anything in the autopsy that no one would blame him. He obviously didn't expect you to survive or the third to have one of his personal medics analyze the medication given to you during the procedure. Tsunade sighed again and massaged her forehead. The diagnosis revealed that for some reason your heart came under a great deal of stress about 2 or 3 years ago and that it has not let up. Whatever it is, I can't find it, but it's like your heart is being squeezed by an outside source. It's been slowly widening the damaged area, and if we hadn't caught it now you would have been in deep trouble in a year or so. Shizune was right when she said the chamber was damaged and needs to be opened up in order to repair it with medical sealing. Tsunade explained. To all this Naruto just nodded numbly. Doctor tried to kill him. Gotcha. Zain was accidentally killing him with the torture seal she'd placed over his heart. Right. Tsunade wanted to strap him down to a table and open up his heart again. Still adjusting to information. I would like to get the operation underway this Saturday if possible. The sooner we take care of it the better. And that means no training until then. While the damage isn't particularly dangerous at the moment, any kind of antagonizing against it could cause the damage to widen. It's a miracle that Kabuto's attack didn't kill you. But thankfully he merely cut the chakra flow to your heart rather than attack the actual organ. It will take a while for your heart to recover afterwards. Even for you, I would expect a few weeks of bed rest. Tsunade explained softly. Tsunade wanted him to have an operation on his heart in 5 days. The small genin stood up abruptly, slammed out of the office, pushed his way into the closest bathroom to promptly empty his stomach. Fuck me. Shizune kept a close eye on the green-faced genin while instructing him on the finer arts of where everything was and what needed to be done first. Naruto would shake his head in understanding or ask a question for clarification once in a while. By time 9 o'clock rolled around, there were 10 clones sitting studiously on any handy space, pens filling out papers, and eyes scanning dreary propositions and reports. Shizune was quick to find that Naruto rarely made a mistake. She'd patiently gone through any errors with him, of which he would give a sheepish apology before correcting them. Apparently the Sadaime had used his paperwork as a means to teach Naruto how to read and write rather than children's books or blank paper. The third would have Naruto copy anything the man was working on and then have Naruto read it to him and question him about what he read. Due to these circumstances, Naruto knew much more about the politics and workings of Konoha than most Chunin. Shizune was ecstatic when 12 o'clock came around and nearly a week's worth of paperwork sat finished with the more important documents waiting for Tsunade to look over in a separate pile. It was around this time that Azuma came into the room with a pile of documents from the downstairs mission room. The man waved merrily to the small blonde, who at first seemed surprised, but returned his wave with an enthusiastic grin. Before any of the three could say a word, a loud boom came from the room below. I have once more trumped my energetic students in a race. Even though I am the winner, I think it is more than obvious that my beloved students deserve a wonderful meal on my tab. Do you not agree? Guy's loud and exuberant voice filled the room. Azuma snickered while Shizune wore a look of bemusement. Naruto just grimaced. Well, it appears Guy's team is back from their C-rank mission to the Land of Bears. It was just my luck that I managed to miss him in order to bring up these papers, huh? Azuma stated with a grin. Nothing to do with seeing Enko hightailing it out of the room screaming about running for our lives. Azuma whispered the last part to Naruto, giving the kid a wink. Naruto snickered. Following the advice of the kid from the night before, Shikamaru almost screamed out in triumph when he and Choji caught sight of Naruto. Naruto was finishing up putting a stack of papers in their appropriate places in a tall, gray filing cabinet. Despite the urge to raise his voice born of hours of frustration and annoyance, he managed to squash it nastily beneath a rock and walk up to the blonde quietly. It was late afternoon and they'd just gotten back from a series of D-ranked missions assigned to them for the day. Shikamaru tapped the blonde on the shoulder, who hurriedly stood up and smiled. Hey Shikamaru, Choji, what's up? Naruto asked cheerily. Shikamaru tilted his head. Why did it almost seem like Naruto had been expecting them? Shikamaru felt Choji stiffen beside him as the big-boned team scrutinized their old classmate. Shikamaru wondered what it was that Choji was seeing that he couldn't. He saw the dark rings under the boy's eyes, but with his large orange jacket it was difficult to tell that the blonde had lost weight. Choji was far better trained than he was to see health problems and discerning a person's size through clothing. It was kinda scary seeing his blonde friend looking so sick and casual at the same time. Like he was used to it. It was with a nauseous realization that he probably was. How could he not have noticed in the academy? Choji moved in first, concern shining in his eyes. Hey Naruto, Choji greeted, offering the blonde some of his chips. No thanks Choji, I'm good, Naruto replied. We wanted to talk to you, Shikamaru said, cutting straight to the point. Oh, well, I'm afraid you're gonna have to hurry cause I've only got about a minute or so of chakra left. Naruto said sheepishly. Huh? Choji asked in confusion. Shikamaru scowled angrily. You're a clone, Shikamaru demanded in frustration. Yeah, I'm already on my way home with Garuko and Shizune-san. Boss just got me to stay to finish up this little bit. The Naruto clone explained. Can you give Naruto a message for us? Choji asked. Shikamaru was about to tell Choji that the clone was about to disappear and couldn't do such a thing because clones can't communicate with its creator when the clone interrupted him. Sure, what is it? The clone asked. Shikamaru sighed in exasperation. Apparently Naruto, a famed clone user, didn't even know that simple fact. It was just like the dead last of the academy to forget a rule of his own style. We need to talk to Naruto. Can you tell him to meet us at the old park we used to play at around 5 tomorrow? Choji asked. The clone visibly frowned, but nodded. All right, the clone said. The clone doesn't have time to give the message to Naruto, Choji. Clones can't communicate with their creator. Shikamaru butted in. The clone frowned again. Boss always remembers what? The clone's body dissipated into smoke. This is far beyond troublesome, Shikamaru muttered despairingly. Choji laughed. Ino Yamanaka giggled quietly to herself as she made her way down the main street market of Konoha's shopping district Tuesday afternoon. There was a slight swagger in her walk and a perk in her step. What she had planned had been long coming. A prank on the prankmaster of the Rookie 12. Let it be known far and wide what a great sense of humor she has. She was not high-strung and she could take a joke unlike what Shikamaru and Choji said. She was fun and unpredictable and would not bore any boyfriend she had like Shikamaru had claimed. And she was not simply pulling this prank because of their comments. Their remarks didn't bother her one bit. Maybe a little. She had considered for a time pranking Shikamaru or Choji, maybe even Asuma or one of her parents. But the idea of pranking Naruto had gotten stuck in her head a while ago and just wouldn't let its claws go. Naruto had pranked her once. It had been when they'd been in the last year of their academy and the humiliation had been unbearable. She and Sakura had a fight during their lunch break in front of the whole class, and Naruto apparently hadn't approved. Ino had screamed, that pink hair was the stupidest color anyone could have and that she would never be caught dead with such a grotesque color on her head. She'd felt guilty about it afterwards because Sakura had teared up a bit and stomped away after the scream, that somehow the whole class heard and laughed about. She didn't have the slightest clue about how he did it, but somehow Naruto snuck pink hair dye into her shampoo, ironically the same shade as Sakura's. She'd been forced to go to school with the mess of pink hair by her father, adding salt to her wounded pride by snickering the entire time. The other students had laughed all day long after she arrived to class, Sakura especially. She knew it was Naruto because the other blonde placed a letter in her mailbox that very night that her father gave her explaining a simple and effective way to rinse the dye out. Add baking soda to her regular, undyed, shampoo. He'd even apologized, but mentioned he thought she deserved it. Since she herself thought she deserved it, she never bothered to yell at him for the act. Now though she found the other blonde to be the perfect target. Naruto had a great sense of humor, so she knew he wouldn't get mad at her. He himself had pulled a prank on her before. He was friends with Shikamaru and Choji, so the prank would definitely be heard by them without her having to brag about it. Best of all though was that he was Sakura and Sasuke's teammate. Sakura would never in a million years pull a prank on anyone. She was just too much the goody two-shoes to do such a thing. Guys like a girl with a sense of humor, at least that's what the magazines told her, so the act would definitely up her chances of getting a date with Sasuke. Sasuke, as Naruto's teammate, would definitely know about the prank because teammates always know those type of things about one another. Knowing Naruto and Sasuke were best friends, rivals like her and Sakura, the two would definitely get into an argument. Sasuke would take the opportunity to make fun of Naruto for falling for the prank, and if she played her cards right, she would be there to receive her rightful praise for initiating it. The plan was perfect. She even had the whole prank planned out. She'd noticed a while ago that the first Tuesday of every month Naruto went to this one particular shop 5 shops on the opposite side from her own family flower shop at exactly 5 minutes after 12. It was a civilian's shop that sold odds and ends, everyday supplies, and Ino didn't really know much of why Naruto went there, only that he did. It surprised Ino actually, That someone that was such a klutz and a troublemaker performed such an act as consecutively being on time. Ino leapt to the roof of the shop opposite of the general store and eagerly awaited Naruto's arrival, already going over how she planned to gloat about it all. That's when she saw the oh-so-familiar head of pink hair walking down the street. Ino's smile got absolutely wicked. The platinum blonde leapt off the building, startling the poor genin out of her wits, before ushering the girl to the roof. "Ino, what in the world is this about?" Sakura asked in a huff. "Hush, you'll see in a few minutes," Ino said with a wink. Sakura gave her a half-hearted glare in reply. That's when Ino spotted the sunflower dose of blonde walking slowly down the streets with a dog at his heels. The hideous abomination of orange clothing painting a neon sign around the boy. Ino smirked widely. "Right on time," she noted happily. Sakura also noticed her teammate walking down the street, though to Ino's surprise she didn't try to gain the boy's attention, which the mindwalker had been prepared to stop, but rather looked away. Did they get into a fight or something? Ino idly wondered before mentally shrugging. They silently watched as Naruto peered around somewhat cautiously before entering the store. Ino raised a brow at that. The girl turned when she felt a light tugging on her shirt. "Ino, what are we doing here?" Sakura demanded. Ino sighed in exasperation. Sakura always hated being left out of the loop in anything. The girl could be annoyingly persistent. "We're here to prank Naruto," Ino answered shortly. "Now be quiet," she added. "Ino, I don't think that's a good idea. Naruto hasn't been acting right lately. I don't think you should prank him right now," Sakura whispered. "I mean, he's been off ever since we started watching Kakashi's dogs. I think you should wait." Ino stared at Sakura incredulously. "Do you know how long it took me to plan this out? Besides, a good prank should cheer Naruto right up," Ino said triumphantly. "Now be quiet, he'll be out in a few minutes. Naruto never stays long." Sakura tilted her head in curiosity, wonderingly how Ino knew this, and she didn't, but decided to stay silent. The dog came out first. Naruto followed soon after with a single brown bag in his arms and an envelope clutched in his right hand against the crinkling front. Behind him the old woman who owned the store followed suit as she did every month and stood in the doorway. Now was Ino's chance. She flipped rapidly through the seals and paused in the last one, throwing her hands forward, aiming for the old women. She whispered the words of her jutsu out quietly but clearly. "Mind destruction jutsu." Naruto glanced at Garuko again as they continued walking down the street. The dog wasn't reacting to the glares that Naruto got from all around them. He hadn't reacted in days past either. That was good. It meant the extra money he'd been forced to give the greedy moneysucker was worth it. A simple mental touch that suggested that any extra attention Naruto received wasn't important. It was sort of like a genjutsu, only stronger. It had been the second part of the memory erase so that the remaining time Garuko spent with him would be noted as mundane and boring. Naruto gave a mental sigh of relief. Naruto had been putting Garuko to sleep each night with the deep slumber jutsu his grandfather figure had taught him before heading out to the bar the last few nights. The simple solution caused him to slap his forehead and ask himself why he hadn't done it in the first place. Ah, the wonders of foresight. Garuko couldn't question what he didn't know about after all. One thing that bothered him though was that the dog was complaining about headaches, which could only mean one thing. The dog's subconscious was fighting hard against the memory seal placed on him. The Yamanaka had warned him that if someone's mind was strong enough they would be able to break the memory seal. But that required the subconscious to fight fully against the conscious mind, which rarely occurred. Naruto hadn't even considered that Garuko would be strong-willed enough to fight against it, so the headaches were an alarming development. The best he could hope for right now would be to get Garuko to Kakashi, or at least out of his hands as soon as possible. If Garuko was separated from him, then there was a chance that the subconscious fighting would fade. At the moment though, they were on their way to Naruto's next paycheck. The young genin was using his lunch hour from the office to take care of this business, so he had plenty of time to drag the stuff from this trip to his apartment before his time was up. He was paid once a month for the shipping work he did each weekend, the first Tuesday of each month, just as Tora-san closed up for lunch. It was an unfortunate coincidence that she possessed the same name as the damnable cat the wife of the fire daimyo kept with her at all time. when the thing referred to as a cat wasn't dragging Genin across the city and through the forests like chickens with their heads cut off. Tora-san preferred to perform the financial business right before lunch, so Naruto made sure to arrive no later than 5 minutes after she closes her shop to get it. She was even nice enough to allow him to buy a bag of supplies while no other customers were in her store. The old woman said she had nothing against him, it was just she didn't want any of her customers turning away because he was in there. It was hard for a widowed woman of her age to run a shop by herself in the first place, and if she attempted to show a defiance of the people's opinion, she would starve. Naruto understood. Not only did she run her business by herself, but she also organized the shipping job for the merchandise that made its way into her shop as well as the surrounding shops. If anyone found out that she gave him a job and allowed him to shop in her store despite the brief time, she would lose a lot of customers. He'd seen it happen to Taiku and Ayame. It was the reason he ate in the back of the shop many a times where no one could see him with Ayame. Naruto looked around cautiously as he approached the shop, making sure that there wasn't anyone glancing in his directly, before slipping into the shop. Naruto sighed in pleasure as the warm air of the shop hit his face. It had been getting chillier and chillier as the month wore on. Pretty soon he'd need to get out his scarf and gloves. "What are we doing here again?" Garuko asked in a bored tone. Naruto absent-mindedly bent his hand down and scratched behind the big dog's ears. The dog immediately leaned into the familiar touch, a deep growl of pleasure seeping through his lips, and the irritation evaporated. It was nice, Naruto would admit, to know the dog's weakness. Garuko lazily tilted his head up towards Naruto with half-lidded eyes. "That is evil," the dog declared before once more leaning into the touch. Naruto smiled. Despite the fact that Garuko now thought he was a brainless buffoon that loved the color orange, they once in a while had a moment of kinship still. "You know you love my evilness," Naruto replied as his fingers gently tugged loose a few stray hairs that had fallen into the nook of the dog's soft pink inner ear. Naruto had noticed that the dog had continuously stopped on the way here to try and scratch the inside part of his ears, unsuccessfully, and it must have been driving him insane. Naruto then carefully scratched the spot where the hairs had been. Garuko shuddered and his fur ruffled up before relaxing. "Thank you," Garuko said stiffly, to which Naruto smiled with sad amusement. The dog was attempting to be dignified. His Garuko had stopped trying to be dignified around him after he'd come home the one night from Zines. Cuddling up next to someone all night would ruin anyone's dignity. "Give me a minute, Naruto," called an elderly voice from the back of the shop. Naruto didn't bother replying. It was the unfortunately fact that unless you were directly in front of the woman speaking in a raised voice, she could not hear a word you said. Naruto instead started to pick through the store and see what items he really needed for the month. Toilet paper, soap, toothpaste. He didn't really need salt, so he skipped over that. Bandages, antiseptic, laundry detergent. He could go without sugar. Naruto's hand paused over the tea. He had enough bags for 1 cup each morning for the next 2 weeks, but if he had 1 cup every other morning, he could stretch it to a month. Tea wasn't a necessity, after all, more like a luxury. He passed it up. Light bulbs, dish soap, needle, thread, tomato soup. He didn't really need soup. He had plenty of rice and ramen to last him a while. He put it back reluctantly. "Have everything you need, Naruto?" asked Tora as she waddled from the back room. Naruto nodded as he placed his chose items on the counter where the register resided. She handed him his check and he handed her the amount for the supplies. She sifted through it in the blink of an eye, amount already counted, years of experience aiding her where her hearing failed. "Right as always, my boy, taxes and all, always the thrifty shopper you are," the old woman murmured to herself as she dispersed the money into their respective places in the register. Garuko snorted from his place on the floor, head on folded front paws. "Naruto, a thrifty buyer? That's a surprise," the dog said in amusement. Naruto flinched at the insult, but put on an indignant look like he would in front of most people. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Naruto demanded loudly. Tora blinked and looked taken aback. "It just means that I think you spend your money wisely," replied Tora owlishly. Naruto blushed scarlet as he realized Tora hadn't heard Garuko's fairly quiet remark. "Sorry, Tora-san. I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to one of Kakashi's dogs. He's got quite the mouth on him," Naruto replied sheepishly, his hand rubbing the back of his neck nervously. Down below, Garuko snickered in amusement. The women blinked and nodded slowly, not quite understanding, but having heard enough of Kakashi's famous dogs to know it to be true. Well, I would like to get to my wonderful lemon chicken, so scooch on outta here, youngin', Tora said with hands on hips. And for goodness sake, eat more. You look like a bag o' bones could beat your little ass in meatless competition, she declared, poking the boy's chest. Garuko snickered as Naruto gave them both an exasperated sigh. The old woman followed him out the door as she always did before suddenly stiffening up directly in the doorframe. Naruto, wait, she cried loudly. Several people looked their way as Naruto turned. The blonde barely caught sight of the widowed women pulling hard on a wire beside the door before something slammed into him from all sides. Naruto freaked. He dropped his bag and his check to the ground and staggered to the side only to hit something that shoved him forward again into the ground. Something was covering his eyes and his whole body. The small genin blindly whipped the goopy stuff from his eyes and tried to open them. A blur of colors came to his sight. He could also hear a large amount of people laughing, probably at him. Naruto tried to calm down. He felt the goopy stuff in his hands. Paint. He was covered in paint. No big deal. Just paint. After coming to that realization, he more calmly than before wiped the paint on his hands on the ground in front of him and then removed the paint that surrounded his eyes. When he thought that they were relatively safe, he opened them. He really wished he hadn't. There was a large crowd of villagers and some shinobi around him in a tight circle that were pointing and jeering at him. He looked down at himself. He was covered from head to toe in bright pink paint that he immediately recognized as house paint. It wouldn't come off no matter how many washes he put his clothes through. Naruto took several deep breaths as he looked around, trying to find the supplies he bought, trying to find his check, but most of all trying to find a way out. Off behind the crowd he heard a dog growling and an old woman he recognized as Tora shouting something. Naruto gingerly stood up and tried to shake off some of the paint. The laughing was so loud that it felt almost like a physical attack against his ears. Suddenly a large banner opened up and slid down the wall of the shop in front of them. Naruto stiffened. No more neon orange, pink is the new in. The laughter got louder. I hope an enemy nin finds you an easy target. Let this be a reminder for what you are and what you deserve. Seriously, Uzumaki, you couldn't have picked anything more stupider looking than that. Dude, you look like a fucking clown. That's Naruto for you. Always trying to outdo himself in the retard meter. Uzumaki, you need to take being a shinobi more seriously or else you'll get yourself killed. Not like anyone would miss him. Naruto hugged himself as he stood there, in the middle of a tidal wave of bodies, fingers curling tightly around his upper arms until they were white. He desperately wanted the ground to rip open and take him down, deep, deep down under the earth. His heart fell into his stomach as his limbs began to feel like jello. Had the merchant done this? Since he hadn't died yet from missions, did he decide to try something else? Did someone else know about what happened with the merchant and his clothes and now they were playing off of it? Did Garuko tell someone even after the dog promised him he wouldn't? That's when Ino and Sakura pushed through the crowd. Ino was laughing so hard that she was holding her sides. Sakura was behind her, attempting very hard not to laugh, but failing miserably. Naruto suddenly felt extremely cold. Look, Naruto, now you can get some better clothes. Like something that Sasuke wears, or well, pretty much anything would look better. Ino proclaimed loudly through fits of laughter. And, hee, I personally think that pink is way better on you than orange. Ino continued as she wiped away a tear from her eye. And, hee, maybe you'll get lucky and Sasuke will want to help you. Ino finished. Naruto backed up, the goop still dripping off of him. He blankly looked around, barely noting the pieces of balloons that were spread in the midst of the paint. One of the men who'd been laughing clapped Ino on the shoulder. Naruto flinched horribly when he recognized him as the same man who twisted and broke his arm in the streets for trying to steal from him all those years ago. That was great, kid, the Chunin said as he calmed his laughter, but I don't think you got the right color. Ino straightened and tilted her head in confusion. The man smirked. He riffled through the grocery bag in his arm and pulled out a tomato. I think red is far more appropriate, the man stated darkly. Sakura stopped laughing and Ino stiffened as they both gazed at the man in stunned silence. Before either girl could say or do anything, the man threw the tomato. The vegetable slammed painfully into the side of Naruto's head and the juice splattered all over the place. Naruto staggered back, not having expected the blow, before looking at Ino and Sakura with hurt and betrayal in his eyes. The two girls just continued to stare in horror as the prank escalated into something that Ino had never expected nor wanted. It was supposed to be a joke. Naruto was supposed to laugh with her and say that pink was better than orange. It was supposed to be a pun off of his own prank. It wasn't supposed to be mean. The crowd wasn't supposed to take such blatant mirth out of it. They weren't supposed to insult Naruto at all. Ino hadn't expected anyone to laugh along with her and Sakura, and certainly not in such a horrible way. They weren't supposed to throw anything at him. This wasn't what she wanted at all. The crowd continued to murmur loudly. It seems even children his own age can't stand him. Can you blame them? I wouldn't want to go near the wretch. He had it coming. Look at him, disgusting. Don't go any closer. I say we take an example from that man and... The people started shouting even harsher insults and threats at the small blonde before a ferocious snarl cut through the air. Garuko had pushed through the crowd and now stood growling fiercely at the people surrounding them. Many of the villagers stepped back fearfully. Kakashi's dogs weren't known for being threatening at all, so the rows of razor-sharp teeth that glistened at the crowd from the normally friendly wolf-like dog frightened them. A large man in the back who'd been shouting since the start of the incident took the moment to push through the crowd and stand next to the boy. He towered above the rest of the group and glared venomously around him. He was a shinobi, obviously an Akamichi, with dirty blonde hair pulled tightly into a ponytail in the back with his head protector slung around his neck. You people should be ashamed of yourselves, he hissed out angrily. Garuko growled loudly in agreement. The crowd of people just began shouting again, but louder and angrier this time. There was no more laughter from the original prank. Ino and Sakura felt a chill run down their spine as they felt the wave of hatred fill the air. Tora finally made it to the center, where she gently tugged Naruto's frozen form behind the Akamichi, who silently made a barrier between himself and the Jinchuriki. Ino and Sakura tried to get to Naruto as well, but they were pushed aside by the suddenly angry crowd. A shadow came down from the rooftops and landed beside the Akamichi. I will take Naruto-kun to Iruka-san, Ebisu said softly to the large Akamichi beside him. The man nodded in appreciation. Ebisu was an elite Junin who had the chakra and skill to shushin 2 or 3 people out of the crowd. Come Naruto-kun, I'm getting you out of here, the Junin said softly. Ebisu gently, but firmly took a hold of the blank-eyed Naruto before his body flickered and disappeared. An angry and confused dog soon after following suit. Konohamaru, Moegi and Udon raced through the halls of the academy to their class. It was almost useless seeing as it was early afternoon and school was half over, but it honestly wasn't their fault this time. Sure, they were practicing making traps, but it was for ninja stuff, not a prank. If Udon hadn't accidentally set off their newly completed trap, then they wouldn't have spent all those hours stuck in a tree with their legs tied together and shoulders attached through a particularly nasty type of glue used for bridge work. It didn't help at all that Konohamaru and Udon had been stuck facing each other in the embarrassing position of cheek to cheek, and at one point in their struggles lip to lip. Both of them were incredibly thankful that Moegi had been stuck tied to Konohamaru's back, facing the sky, and silently swore never to mention to anyone. Ever. They had come to the conclusion that it wasn't a very nice prank and wouldn't do it to anyone else. The 3 of them learned that lesson well when they'd shaved one of their female academy teachers' heads while she was napping. Naruto had been furious with them. Naruto sat them down after their 3rd day of detention and explained that there were certain rules to pranking. The very first rule was that you never perform a prank that can't be undone. He had told them that shaving a person's head, especially a woman that loved her hair like their sensei, wasn't funny but cruel. He explained that it would probably take the women a couple years to regrow her hair and that it would probably deeply hurt her pride to go out in public. They could have permanently done damage that they would never be able to make up for. While it seemed like a harmless prank, it was actually a pretty nasty one. The 3 of them had been rather ashamed of themselves after that and apologized, this time meaningfully, to their sensei for their actions. Naruto then went on to explain that pranking random people at random times was also wrong. Their idol told them that you have to have the right timing because otherwise you could seriously hurt someone without meaning to. Their sensei could have been having a bad day, in which case the harmless prank could turn into a nasty event to add on to other events that might have led up to something worse. A prank should be performed on a person who has been having a normal day if at all possible. They also needed to be careful about who they pranked. If you wanted to prank someone, you had to make sure that they had a good sense of humor. At this, Naruto had admitted he'd pranked many people without a good sense of humor, but in those cases they had done something bad to him first. They'd asked for him to explain, but he'd laughed it off and refused to answer. That was how their big brother figure was. He could talk all day, but he never talked about himself. The Konohamaru Corps found their big brother figure to be amazingly cool and mysterious. All they really knew about Naruto's past was that he was an orphan that had been close to Konohamaru's grandfather, the third Hokage, before he passed away a few months before. Konohamaru had told Moegi and Udon about how his grandfather had once said that Naruto was someone that he held a great deal of respect for. That had brought up a great deal of curiosity and interest. His grandfather, a Kage, greatly respected a genin, the troublemaker of Konoha. They had to know what it was about Naruto that could do that. Many a times the three of them had come up with theories, all the way from Naruto being a secret Anbu captain to being a refugee from another country, all the way to having some super cool bloodline limit he kept secret because it was dangerous. When they'd barraged the blonde with their many theories, he'd laughed uproariously for quite a while. They'd pouted and Naruto had shook his head and relented. He admitted that while he wasn't a refugee, his mother had been. When they demanded he tell them the story, Naruto had smiled wickedly and said maybe another day. Needless to say, the three had been angry and pouted for quite a while before Naruto dragged them to the ramen stand for dinner. They grudgingly forgave him. The three cautiously turned onto the hall of their classroom before stopping dead in their tracks. Moegi, who'd been distracted by a rather pretty butterfly in the window to her left, accidentally bumped into Udon's back, who fell forward into Konohamaru. They both fell to the floor with eyes still trained on the figure, who hadn't even twitched at their arrival. Naruto sat at the small bench outside of Iruka's room, covered in half-dried pink paint and some kind of red goo down the side of his face. Their big brother sat staring blankly at the floor with his hands lifelessly in his lap. Konohamaru pulled himself off the floor and carefully walked up to Naruto. Naruto didn't even notice him. "Aniki?" Konohamaru asked quietly. Naruto looked up and Konohamaru watched as recognition flooded the older boy's eyes. Naruto threw a grin across his face and squinted his eyes so that the three wouldn't be able to read him. "Oh, heyo Konohamaru, Moegi, Udon. What's up?" Naruto asked in a raised voice. Konohamaru glanced at his best friends. He told them about what he'd seen last week and about what Naruto said about being sick. They'd been just as worried about the blonde as him. Moegi gingerly walked over, sitting beside the blonde, not caring in the least when pink droplets smeared across the side of her shirt. "What happened, Naruto-ne-san?" Moegi asked softly. Naruto shrugged and attempted to wipe some of the paint off of his hands, only to succeed in moving the half-dried goop around. It's nothing. It's just been a lousy couple of weeks is all. It wasn't a big deal at all. I just wasn't expecting the prank end." Naruto trailed off, giving a weak smile. Moegi pulled out a square cloth from one of her pockets and wiped most of the paint from his face. "Who pranked you?" Udon asked as Konohamaru swiped a clump of the paint off and sniffed. The scarf-wearing child grimaced as he recognized the strong odor of house paint. Konohamaru was well aware that Naruto didn't have the money to replace his clothes, so whoever did this was a real asshole. Naruto shrugged again. "Ino and Sakura. They probably don't know anything about how to pull a decent prank, so it's okay. I know they didn't mean for it to go the way it did." Naruto explained half-heartedly, a hollow laugh echoing sadly in the hallway. The three flinched when the pink-haired girl's name came up. In their experience, she was a quick-tempered female who was loyal to a fault to Uchiha Sasuke and disliked Naruto for some reason or another. They briefly remembered Ino as Sakura's best friend, but Naruto had been hesitant to suggest it for reasons unknown to the trio. His other teammate, Sasuke Uchiha, was a bit of a mixture of feelings for the trio. Moegi would admit that the Uchiha was cute and cool, But Naruto was extremely nice and always willing to help her with any of her problems, so the blonde earned far more respect in her eyes than the Uchiha prodigy. Udon and Konohamaru thought that the Uchiha was cool but that Naruto was cooler. Plus they'd all seen how the fan-encrusted boy treated Naruto and they didn't like it. The Uchiha and Naruto were supposed to be friends, but they didn't act like friends, at least not like Udon, Moegi and Konohamaru did. Moegi used up the last clean corner of her small cloth and pulled it away from Naruto, who smiled at her gratefully. "Thank you," Naruto told her sincerely. She'd managed to clean off all of his face. Konohamaru scrutinized Naruto's face and noticed to his chagrin that his big brother hadn't gained any of the weight back that he'd lost while he was sick. It really upset him, and it made him wonder if Naruto had lied to him about getting better in the first place. Was Naruto still sick? Why was he up and about if he was still sick? Unfortunately, he wasn't allowed to contemplate the thought further because Ebisu and Iruka came out of the classroom. Ebisu promptly finished his missions report on the simple B rank that was clearly below the level in which his status as elite Junin entailed that he'd just completed and planned to spend the rest of the day in his bed. Not because the mission was difficult for him. Not at all. Clearly he could handle something so simple. He was merely wisely choosing to rejuvenate his chakra supply rather than rashly spend it in a bar celebrating a completed mission like the other Junin did. Yes, that was it. So when he heard the angry shouts of some villagers that appeared to be about to engage in an uncivilized fight, he did not moan in despair at having to perform his rightful duties of securing the safety of the involved individuals. Nor did he mentally debate whether to fuck it all and go to bed. And he most certainly did not consider using a simple water jutsu to cool off the idiotic imbeciles too stupid to know when he wanted to go to bed. These events did not occur. Luckily for the man, there was no Yamanaka in the vicinity to disprove Ebisu's momentary state of denial. His eyes scanned the crowd and widened in disgusted horror. A crowd of grown adults were harassing the young Jinchuriki with what Ebisu could only describe as a mob-like intelligence. Naruto was covered from head to toe in paint and staring at a large poster directly beneath Ebisu. The crowd was jeering at the 13-year-old as if he were a criminal. Ebisu felt his anger rise. It was true that he'd felt animosity towards the Jinchuriki in the past, but even at his peak of hatred he'd never say the things he was hearing to the boy. After taking the boy on for chakra training at the beginning of his month preparation for the finals, Ebisu came to the realization of how utterly wrong he'd been about the boy. Now, standing above the crowd and watching Naruto's blank-eyed expression, he felt a rage fill him. This wasn't right, not at all. He had to visibly force himself to not punch the man that threw the tomato and quickly shushined, again, SP, to the ground beside the large Akamichi. The Chunin who would dare attack a fellow shinobi had been dully noted in his mind's memory. The man would pay later. Ebisu felt disgusted with himself as a horrible thought struck him. Honored grandson, if you lower yourself to consort with creatures of this sort, you will descend to his level. If I'm such a horrible ninja, then why is it that sometimes I've done even better than Sasuke or Sakura? That's because you have reserves that are hardly even human. A year ago he had taunted Naruto in a similar fashion, and he'd even gave quite the nasty remark during his training. I will take Naruto-kun to Iruka-san, Ebisu said in a commanding, but quiet voice. He nodded to the Akamichi, a silent show of respect being acknowledged between them as he looked toward Naruto. Naruto was a mess. Yes, Iruka was definitely the only person right for caring for the boy at the moment. Iruka was the only shinobi outside the third Hokage that showed his absolute and full support of Naruto. Come Naruto-kun, I'm getting you out of here, the elite Junin murmured to the small blonde. Ebisu tugged on Naruto's shirt gently, but firmly, and pulled the boy closer to him. The man let out a breath as he concentrated the little amount of chakra he had left, and before the crowd disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Ebisu thought it was strange, as they entered the academy, that Naruto would allow him to lead him like he was. Normally the blonde would have been furious to be led by the hand like a child. Ebisu carefully navigated the halls till they were just outside Iruka's classroom and reluctantly told the boy to wait outside the room for him. Naruto just nodded his head and plopped down on the bench without a word. Ebisu frowned at the action, but decided it was best to not question it. As quietly as possible Ebisu entered the classroom. He needn't have bothered at subtlety though. The children were loud enough to have covered a stampede of elephants. The moment upon his entrance, Iruka glanced in his direction and signaled that he would be with him in a moment. It took all but 2 minutes to have every one of the horde of 8-year-olds to be quieted and busily working on whatever assignment Iruka saw fit to deign them with. The young Chunin made his way over with a slightly weary air. There was little doubt in Ebisu's mind that the man's weary approach came from whatever Naruto told the man about him. At that thought the man winced. Still, the man had a smile and an open body language to convey a willingness to listen despite past events. It was this same openness and easy forgiveness that most likely attracted Naruto's attention and respect in the first place. For that, Ebisu respected the young man despite his rank as a Chunin. Forgive the commotion before Ebisu-san. I was teaching the children how to set up basic traps in everyday, plain Jane settings, without them being seen. Not very successful, but good enough for first attempts, Iruka said sheepishly as he scratched the back of his neck nervously. So that's where he gets it from. Ebisu thought in amusement as an image of Naruto performing that same nervous gesture came to mind. I'm sorry to bother you while in the middle of class, but there has been an incident that needs your immediate attention, Ebisu stated while stifling a yawn. The adrenaline rush from earlier was gone and the Junin was having a hard time preventing his head from dipping to the side. Damn his unswerving sense of duty. What type of incident would need the help of an academy teacher? Iruka asked in alarm. Ebisu grimaced. He hated giving bad news to people. It just wasn't in his forte. He did not possess an ability to be empathetic. He could be sympathetic, but trying to see a situation from a different person's view and understand what they were going through was not in his arsenal of mental skills. One of the reasons he was a private tutor rather than an academy instructor. Naruto was targeted by a rather distasteful prank, but it was not that. That was the problem. Rather the reaction that the witnesses of the prank performed. The crowd took the opportunity unwittingly supplied by Sakura-san and Ino-san to threaten Naruto. One of them even had the gall to throw something at the boy. Ebisu explained quietly. Iruka was looking pale as he continued to talk. Naruto is safe, outside this classroom actually, but I thought it would be best if you kept an eye on him today. It's been years since so many people showed such blatant anger so publicly. I will watch your class for the rest of the day, Ebisu finished briskly. Iruka nodded thankfully and the two men headed to the door. Ebisu watched as Iruka stiffened at the sight of the small blonde. The man doubted he even noticed his 3 late students standing around the boy. Naruto shrugged in response to Iruka's frozen form and tried to slap a grin on his face, but it turned into another grimace. Oh Naruto, Iruka said softly. The young Chunin wrapped his right arm around Naruto's shoulders, not hesitating in the least despite the paint, and began to lead Naruto down the hall. Ebisu watched them go silently and admittedly in awe of the way the two seemed to communicate without saying much. Konohamaru didn't seem so keen to allow his sensei and big brother figure to go so easily. Is Naruto still sick? Konohamaru demanded loudly. The boy's voice carried its way into the classroom, causing curious 8-year-old ears to listen in. Naruto flinched horribly at the loud question and turned to glare at the younger boy. Konohamaru stepped back a bit in surprise at the icy glower directed his way, but ultimately held his ground in determination. Sick? Iruka questioned worriedly as he glanced down at Naruto. Ebisu also turned to take a closer look at the boy. Now that he was looking, Ebisu noticed with chagrin that the boy did appear to be thinner than before, and his face, that he could now see had been cleared of paint, seemed rather pale. Was that why Naruto had allowed him to lead him so easily? Because he was ill? The small blonde's glare seemed to intensify as his and Iruka's gaze continued to scrutinize him. I told you already, Konohamaru. I came down with a bad flu, but now I'm better. I'm not sick anymore, Naruto said angrily. Ebisu noted with more than a little confusion that the anger seemed to be laced with fear. Fear of what? Konohamaru crossed his arms in rebellious defiance and glared back fiercely. That's what you said nearly a week ago, Aniki. But from what I see, you don't look no better to me, Konohamaru declared in a childish huff. Ebisu would admit only to himself that he was slightly impressed with his student's evident dismissal of his idol's own words. Another part of him noted that he would have to work on his young student's use of vocabulary. It was not appropriate for the honorable grandson to be speaking in such an uneducated fashion. Naruto scowled. I'm fine. Konohamaru stomped his foot. Are not. Iruka coughed to gain everyone's attention. All right, Naruto, you're staying at my house tonight. No arguments. Konohamaru, Moegi, Udon. Detention with me tomorrow afternoon after classes. What? Konohamaru cried out indignantly. Ebisu took his chance to usher the children into the classroom with a nod in Iruka's direction. Iruka in turn smiled warmly before tugging Naruto away in the direction of his home. Naruto followed tiredly behind him, not in the mood to fight or argue, till he walked beside him. As they entered onto the front road, Naruto leaned against Iruka's shoulder. The man once more put his arm around Naruto's much smaller shoulder with a worried frown creasing his features. When one of Kakashi's dogs leapt from a roof and padded along beside them, Iruka spared the animal barely a glance before his attention drifted back to Naruto. The medium-sized wolf spoke not a word as he followed the two humans. Lady Tsunade, there's a young genin here to see you, Sasuke Uchiha. Shizune announced in a clipped tone. Tsunade raised a brow at her assistant, but nodded in acceptance. She'd question the young woman later. Shizune used the same tone of voice and nature when she interacted with her newly made apprentice Sakura. In walked the famed prodigy of Hitaki Kakashi of the infamous Sharingan. The boy was tightly holding his shoulder where, if she wasn't wrong, lay the cursed seal placed there by her Rouge teammate. The raven-haired youth had a look of resigned determination, like he was walking to his own execution, and wished to see it through with pride. The arrogant smirk he normally wore had been temporarily subdued for some reason. Both her eyebrows rose. The Uchiha sat down roughly in one of her two guest chairs, a worn look stretched across his face, pride the only thing keeping him from moaning in pain. Tsunade gingerly picked up her freshly made cup of tea and calculatingly looked over the rim toward the boy. She murmured softly, I don't recall inviting you to sit in a chair, boy. So please tell me why it is that your ass is in one of my seats. It wasn't a question, more of a demand, much to the prodigy's immense surprise. The Uchiha blinked, then sputtered indignantly, thought about it and proceeded to swiftly stand without a word. He remembered some of Sakura's yammering, and two of those things were the Hokage's strength and temper. Tsunade nodded her head in approval. The boy was smart after all. All right, good, now you may have a seat, boy, Tsunade said with a wave of her hand. This time the Uchiha blinked for several seconds before looking at her incredulously with an almost angry aura. Well, I don't have all day to listen to your useless whining, so sit down, Tsunade said far more harshly. She forgot how much fun it was to scare little genin could be. The boy scrambled to the seat he'd been in only moments before. So what request do you have for me? I've already gotten requests from both of your teammates, Tsunade said idly. The Uchiha in front of her tilted his head ever so slightly, which caused all of his bangs to fall to one side of his face, and both eyebrows raised. I know that Sakura asked you to be her mentor, but what did Naruto ask you for? Sasuke asked before wincing. Tsunade couldn't tell if it was due to the cursed seal or the mention of Naruto's name. Tsunade tapped her fingers as she debated the merit of saying anything to the boy in front of her. On one hand, it was really none of the Uchiha's business, but on the other she wanted to know why Naruto suddenly wanted out of Team 7 and why he hadn't said anything to his team. Tell me, Uchiha, how has your team been lately? Tsunade asked rather than answer. The Uchiha winced again. Tsunade tipped her teacup back and took a long gulp of the hot liquid, mentally trying to conjure the sweet jasmine into harsh vodka. Instead, all she got was a slightly burnt tongue. That bad, huh? Tsunade muttered with a sigh. The boy sighed through his nose as he spoke. That's actually part of the reason why I'm here today. The Uchiha began in a crisp yet weary tone. Kakashi placed a suppression seal on me over Orochimaru's curse seal, but it's not working. It's been hurting a lot more recently and it's been affecting my thinking. If I feel mad, then there's a stinging pain from the seal and I'm absolutely furious. If I feel sad, then the pain comes and I'm suddenly overwhelmed by despair. If I'm thinking about something, then I feel a twinge and what I was thinking about becomes darker, twisted. The Uchiha trailed off into silence, looking at his Hokage with an almost desperate need for help. Tsunade stared into her cup. Her hands gently swished the cooling tea back and forth as her thoughts tumbled in a similar fashion. She really didn't know much about the boy in front of her, only that Naruto was willing to die in order to bring her back home to heal him and their sensei. She also knew that Sakura had a rather large crush on the boy. Luckily she'd learned how to tune out such rants with a miracle ability called selective hearing. It was often used by the elderly shinobi, such as her own sensei, and mistakenly labeled as going deaf. It left her in the unfortunate position of having no clue as to any of the many facts Sakura would have informed her about if she'd been listening. No doubt Sakura held a biased opinion, but she'd been a kunoichi of the highest degree for a long time and would have been able to pull out the grain of truth no matter how deeply intertwined with fiction it was. She gently swished her cup once again before placing it on the table. The boy that she'd unconsciously adopted as a grandson told her that Sasuke was a talented shinobi and a good person. The girl that she'd taken on as her apprentice for the sheer amount of skill in chakra control and a evident good heart looked up to him and had a crush on him. Sasuke Uchiha, huh? Tsunade cleared her throat. The seal placed on you to control the curse seal relies solely on your will. The only way that the curse seal would be able to influence your thoughts would be if you wanted the power that it offers, whether it be conscious or subconscious. The only way that the suppression seal can effectively work is if you wholeheartedly want to suppress it and all that it represents. Tsunade stated matter-of-factly. Sasuke visibly flinched and looked away guiltily. Tsunade nodded to herself, silently wishing that a nice bottle of sake was within her grasp. Unfortunately, her loathsome and nosy know-it-all assistant had decided that alcohol in the office was a bad thing. Shizune's such a fun sucker, Tsunade thought dismally. So you consciously wanted the power. What made you come to me for help then? Tsunade asked. It was just her luck that her wretched ex-teammate would leave her with a mess. The Uchiha, no Sasuke, still refused to look at her. He preferred to look out the window, keeping her in his sight from the corner of his right eye, his fists clenched wide at his side. Something happened nearly a week ago that made me realize that my thoughts are being manipulated. It scared me to death and made me angry at the same time. I don't want anyone or anything to make decisions for me or force me into something. What happened? It forced me to think rationally, clearly. Sasuke tried to explain. It made me see a lot of the things I've been doing and saying recently without the anger and hatred clouding everything. The last of the words were said so quietly that Tsunade had to strain in order to hear the boy. Tsunade peered at the dark-haired little genin in front of her with the thinnest bit of respect. Perhaps her ex-teammate hadn't been quite so right about the last Uchiha of Konoha after all, and some of Naruto and Sakura's respect for the boy held some foundation to it. She considered the situation as the last few drops of cooling hot tea slid from side to side. There was one option that she could offer the Uchiha. But if the boy wasn't strong enough, if his will wasn't absolutely set. Tsunade spoke softly, but her voice was so crisp and clear there was no mistaking anything she said. I would like to propose an idea to you, Sasuke. Two people have gone through with a particular ritual to completely seal away a curse seal given to them by Orochimaru that entails some high risks. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. I'll do it. Tsunade smirked. Your arrogance is just as large as your predecessors. There are no percentages of risk for this, Sasuke. Simply a reading of the soul. The success completely depends on you. In this ritual you will either walk away with your life and freedom or be devoured by the seal till ashes remain where your body once was. Live or die depends completely on you. In the wake of her words, Sasuke simply sat there quietly. Tsunade gave the boy a sad, rueful smile, her voice just as cheerful and stern as when he walked in the office. Still eager to jump into this? Naruto pulled the towel through his hair as he stepped out of Iruka's shower. The air was full of steam as the blonde had taken advantage of the hot water nearly burning his skin. He was more relaxed in Iruka's home than he ever was in his own home or with his team. His muscles, which seemed to have been stuck in a permanent tense state, finally relaxed under the shower's ministrations. When he got dressed in a pair of Iruka's rookie Chunin clothes, he found Garuko and his old sensei waiting for him on the couch in the living room. Pulling the far too long sleeves up his arm and trying not to trip on the too long pant legs, Naruto stumbled across the living room. He settled into the spot beside Iruka and leaned against him without a word. In response, Iruka carefully picked up 2 mugs of hot cocoa from the coffee table and placed one in Naruto's hands. Iruka knew exactly how to handle a melancholy Naruto. Warmth and companionship. A hot shower. something warm to drink and a familiar person to just be with. No words are required. The simple act of being beside one another in safety was good enough for the blonde to feel better. Iruka wasn't quite sure what to make of the animal beside him, but somehow the dog seemed just as confused and worried as himself. So the academy teacher simply shrugged at the dog's presence. Garuko seemed to relax Naruto, and that was good enough for him. Naruto held the warm chocolate liquid comfortably and took a sip of it contentedly. He could always just get up a little extra early tomorrow to work it off. Naruto brought his legs up on the couch and fully leaned his head against Iruka's arm. Garuko moved from Iruka's side to Naruto's, snuggling as close as he could, and burying his face under the pillow at the edge of the couch. "You want to talk about it?" Iruka asked quietly. "No," Naruto said firmly. Iruka nodded in understanding. Naruto took another sip before leaning forward and setting the mug down again. As he withdrew back into the comfort of the couch, he laid his head down on his knees so that he was looking at Iruka. "Iruka-sensei, what are you doing Saturday?" Naruto asked. "Just grading papers." "Why?" Iruka asked, also putting down his mug. "There's something important that I'm doing Saturday, and can you come with me?" Naruto asked softly. Naruto glanced quickly at the dog beside him, eyes nervous, and shoulders tensed uncertainly. Iruka frowned. Naruto sounded scared, and that quite frankly spooked him. Naruto wasn't scared of anything. He was the student who jumped off the cliff first to jump into the water below on a field trip. He was the one who stood up to 6 older boys bullying him and won in the fight that followed merely because he could take the hits they threw at him. He was the child who bypassed several Chunin squads to hang suspended on a rope over a nearly 1,000-foot drop to paint the most prized monument in Konogakure. Naruto was someone who faced a Chunin in battle and won before he even graduated from the academy. Naruto was not frightened easily. "What is it that you need to do Saturday, Naruto?" Iruka asked. "An operation," Naruto mumbled. "I'm sorry, what?" Iruka asked confused. "I need to get an operation," Naruto stated louder. Garuko's head shot out from under the pillow. Iruka stiffened up and stared at his younger brother figure. "An operation for what?" Iruka asked worriedly. "Naruto?" Garuko prodded gently. "For my heart," Naruto finally answered. "Explain," Iruka demanded calmly. Naruto spent the rest of the afternoon curled up by Iruka's side, quietly telling his father figure everything concerning his heart. Chapter 15. Broken Memory Seal. A bag of chips popped open. Fingers reached inside and pulled out a handful. Eyes belonging to a rounded face peered around the deserted playground in search of blonde hair. Choji licked his lips as Shikamaru glanced his way from his spot on the ground. Sharp dark brown eyes periodically would sweep their sights across the area before turning up once more. The lazy teen was idly watching the cloudy sky as they waited for the third member to show up. Neither of them would admit it, but both of them were nervous about finally talking to Naruto. He and Shikamaru knew that Naruto was sick, but getting the blonde to admit it, and then trying to get him to let them help him would be a painful task. Naruto obviously didn't want anyone to know he was sick, for whatever reason, and Naruto was the most stubborn person they knew. Well, it was a coin toss between Lee and Naruto. Ching, chin, ching. Choji looked in the direction of the metal fence, curious as to what was hitting it. A small but fast figure was running along the top of it in their direction. When they made it to the area of the fence directly in front of them, the figure jumped and landed softly beside Shikamaru. Choji's hand stilled and he blinked. It was Naruto, but he wearing clothes far too big for him. And not orange. Shikamaru nodded in welcome while Choji waved. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late. I got into a mess and had to borrow clothes from Iruka-sensei," Naruto explained sheepishly. "Ah, that explained it." Choji's eyes critically assessed the small blonde before him. By the dark rings, Choji could tell that Naruto hadn't gotten a full night's sleep in the last 3 or 4 weeks. The visible sign didn't seem to be in sync with Naruto's body language though. Normally a person that's sleep-deprived would have disrupted body movement. Jerks, twitches, stiffness, slowed reaction time to speech or movement. Naruto exhibited none of these. Then it clicked. He remembered a conversation that Ino and Sakura held not too long after the Chunin exams. Sakura had commented that Naruto healed faster than most people. That claim was supported when Naruto, who'd been badly cut up and heavily bruised from Team 7's mission in Snow Country, was healed completely in 2 days. It would take a normal person 3 weeks to heal from the same wounds. Choji supposed that such a healing rate could also point to an ability to endure longer periods of stress on the body before it succumbs to evident signs of fatigue. Naruto's tan skin held a pinched look to it, slightly paler than normal, with small patches of red that would have been easier to see if he was looking at someone naturally pale. Naruto's lips were dry, cracked and nearly white. These things pointed to slight dehydration from vomiting and a low level, but constant fever that might have been a high level at one point. Naruto's hair was also duller than usual, which pointed to a sudden lack of vitamins, not just one kind, but most vitamins. Chances were that Naruto hadn't been eaten very much since his illness struck him. Naruto shifted, walking over to the swings, and sagging tiredly into a seat. The movement told Choji exactly how much Naruto weighed at the moment, and it scared him even further. Out of the rookie 12, Naruto was the youngest and smallest of them all, even all the girls. Naruto was normally about 85 pounds, which Choji knew was 5 pounds less than he should be, for his age and height. At the moment though, Naruto was only 74 pounds. Whatever sickness this was, it had caused a dangerous amount of weight loss. Choji imagined that Naruto's collarbone was probably far most defined and his ribs visible along with his hip bone. Once again though, his damned oversized clothes hid it from view. Naruto began to push back and forth on the swing with his feet, just hard enough to give him a little movement. That was Naruto, never satisfied with holding still, naturally fidgety. "So what you guys want to talk about?" Naruto asked. He traded glances with Shikamaru. Shikamaru sighed. "Look, Naruto, it's too bothersome to attempt to beat around the bush with this. We know that you've been sick and it's really worried us," Shikamaru said bluntly. Naruto's feet dragged across the ground as he halted the swinging motions to look up in surprise at the two of them. Blonde hair fell to the side as Naruto tilted his head and squinted his eyes in scrutiny. Choji shifted uncomfortably under the unfamiliar gaze. "Even if I'm sick," Naruto said slowly, "why would that bother you guys? It's not like I've been failing missions. I'm still doing my job." Choji stared at the blonde, unsure, before glancing at Shikamaru for reassurance. The shadow user gave a slight nod to him. Choji let out a breath of air to relax. He did not do good in confrontations like these. On the battlefield he simply followed Shikamaru's directives, but in a scenario where he knew more than Shikamaru, the large team found himself faltering. "Naruto, we're your friends. If something's going on or you're sick, then we want to be able to help," Choji explained steadily. Choji watched as Naruto's lips twitched at the corner of his mouth in a bitter smile even as he shook his head. "We're comrades, not friends," Naruto said softly, almost sadly. Choji stared in hurt silence. Shikamaru wasn't nearly so passive. "We didn't spend all fucking week tracking you done because you're a shinobi. Do you really think I'd put all this effort into trying to lecture you about missions?" Shikamaru asked in exasperation. Naruto shrugged indifferently before getting up from the swing and heading for the gates. Choji stepped in front of the blonde, watching Naruto's eyes darken as he tried to step back only to feel Shikamaru's hand clamp onto his shoulder. Naruto was trapped between a boulder and a stubborn shadow user. "We tracked you down because you're our friend as well as our comrade," Shikamaru said calmly. Choji nodded in agreement. Naruto looked around nervously, rubbing the bridge of his nose, avoiding looking at either of them. "You guys don't know anything about me, how can you say that?" Naruto finally asked. Shikamaru sighed. "You're Naruto, a little slow sometimes, a funny guy, stubborn, annoyingly so. You're loud and brash, but you also believe in your teammates and try to help anyone who needs it. You're Naruto," Shikamaru answered with a wry grin. Choji watched Naruto look at the ground, shifting from foot to foot, hands shoved deep into the depths of two big pants. "You don't know very much," Naruto observed, his head slowly rising to look at them with a wobbly smile in place. "No," Shikamaru agreed, his words coming out with great consideration, "but we know enough to know that you're a good person. We know enough that we want to help and get to know you better." Choji nodded in agreement. He wasn't nearly as word-savvy as Shikamaru, but the young Chunin seemed more than capable of talking for the both of them. Naruto hesitated for a moment before meeting their gazes evenly for the first time that night. Choji felt himself still. It struck him suddenly that he hadn't looked Naruto directly in the eyes since that day years ago when Naruto had come up to play with them and Choji had turned his back on him in avoidance. He suddenly remembered why he avoided looking into Naruto's eyes since then. Icy blue stared back at him just like then. Guarded, weary, unsure, hopeful. Naruto's eyes went completely against his personality in every way and made you question not only him, but yourself. It was eerie, always had been. He could even hear Shikamaru's shift from front foot to back foot. He'd been startled. What if I'm not a good person? What if you're wasting your time by going through all this effort just to help someone who doesn't deserve it? Naruto questioned, cold eyes glittering in the moonlight. The month was near its end, the full moon casting shadows about the sturdy ground that weaved with the leaves swimming about the windy air. Winter would be there soon with its chilling air and unforgiving bite. Choji wasn't sure what to say to that. He tried. Really he did, but it was too much. His lips twitched and a grin spread across his face. Shikamaru shook his head and laughed. You really do have to make everything so troublesome. Tell you what, if you turn out to be some evil person bent on world destruction, we'll talk about what you deserve and don't. Otherwise I think any effort we put into helping you is worth it. Shikamaru said, clapping Naruto's back lightly before flinching at the muscle and bone he felt. Choji saw this and grimaced. They'd gotten a bit sidetracked. Naruto didn't laugh at Shikamaru's joke though. Instead he seemed to pale a little. Shikamaru raised a brow questioningly as Naruto muttered under his breath. Naruto, you aren't planning world domination, are you? Choji asked teasingly. No, Naruto answered, eye twitching. Back to the main point though, Shikamaru said quietly, we'd like to know why you're sick. Both Naruto and Choji sobered immediately. Choji watched as Shikamaru clenched the fist that had touched Naruto's back. It seemed that his friend knew now what Choji had known since Naruto sat down on the swing. Perhaps not the extent, but certainly a much closer idea than he had before. It's not bad, just a nasty flu. I'm already over it, Naruto told them, grinning. Choji stared at his friend long and hard. He was lying. He knew that much, but the smile looked real. It made him feel intensely uncomfortable to know that his friend could lie so easily. You don't have to lie to us, Choji said softly. Naruto's smile faltered for a second before it became wider. It's not a big deal. I can take care of myself. I'm not weak, Naruto insisted, waving his hand as if to wave off the whole affair. We're not saying you are, but we are saying you need help. There's a big difference, Shikamaru told him sternly. Naruto shrugged before sighing. I'll tell you if you'll let it be and promise not to tell Sasuke or Sakura. Naruto finally offered. Choji exchanged looks with Shikamaru and a message passed between them. We won't tell Sasuke or Sakura, Shikamaru began slowly. But whether we do something or not depends on what you tell us. Choji finished, putting his empty bag of potato chips down. Naruto gripped his left arm before rubbing it as if he was suddenly cold, and he found intense interest in the slide 8 feet in front of him. Look, it's not a big deal. It's just my heart is a bit damaged. Been damaged since I was a kid, Naruto explained softly. Choji felt his own heart trap in his throat. Beside him, Shikamaru's jaw clenched. I've been having checkups and I'm going in for a surgery pretty soon. I'm handling it, so, thanks for your guys' help, but I've got it all under control. Naruto looked up then and grinned, if possible, even wider than before. I've had these problems for years, so it's not like I don't know how to take care of myself. Naruto explained, pulling away from them a bit. Naruto, heart damage that's really bad. Why have you been? Why are you taking missions? Shikamaru demanded angrily. Naruto stared at him, startled beyond words. It's more than that though, isn't it? Choji questioned. When Naruto remained silent, he barreled on. It's worsened lately, right? That's why you've become so ill. Choji trailed off. I'm not ill, just a little tired, Naruto insisted. Exhausted is more like it, Choji countered. You need to stay with someone. You shouldn't be living by yourself in such a condition, Choji finished. I'm staying with Iruka till the surgery, Naruto answered. That's not what we mean, Naruto. Shikamaru butted in. And why does everyone insist on calling it a condition? You all act as if I'm so fucking piece of glass or soma thin. Naruto muttered under his breath. Then Naruto blinked, looking at Shikamaru in confusion, apparently just hearing his last remark. What do you mean by that? Naruto asked. I mean, I think that you should permanently stay with someone. We're discussing it with our parents and I think that they'll go for it. We want you to come live with one of us, Shikamaru explained softly. Choji watched as Naruto began to tremble before them. It first came in the form of a light quiver of the lip before his hands began to shake and then a shudder visibly touched his shoulders. Naruto's head was bent forward so that it was impossible to see his eyes behind two long blonde bangs. Naruto clenched his fist and for some reason the action served as a means of pulling himself together. Choji watched in concern as the shaking stopped to be replaced with a stiffness. Naruto, Choji asked uncertainly. Then Naruto's head shot up so fast he was sure the blonde suffered from whiplash. A grin split his face so wide that his eyes were closed. His body still stiff even while he shook his head in ill-concealed mirth. You guys are very kind, but your parents would and will never do anything like that, Naruto stated quite firmly. Choji didn't understand. He looked toward Shikamaru to see a hard look in the brunette's eyes. Shika understood. Naruto continued. There's a very good reason why everyone in Konoha hates me. Your parents aren't just going to start smiling and being nice to me because you want them to. I'm a bad influence, remember? Naruto demanded softly. Indeed, Choji did remember. His mother's own words she'd said so long ago right in front of Naruto's face. Naruto, my mom hasn't said anything about you in a long time. Choji hurried in defense of his mom. So now it's okay to hang out with me, right? 'Cause I'm not so terrible anymore. Not nearly as big of a plague? Naruto questioned. There wasn't any anger or even mirth now. Just tiredness and acceptance. Choji didn't know what to say and it seemed Shikamaru didn't either. Naruto just smiled and shook his head in sad understanding. I've been taking care of myself, whether I've been sick or not, my whole life. It's alright, I don't need help and I would never bother you guys and your families like that, Naruto said reassuringly. The blonde gently placed a hand on Choji's shoulder, giving the tense shoulders a gentle squeeze, before walking past him. Naruto bent his knees slightly in preparation for making a jump up onto the chain-link fence once more in order to get to the rooftops when Shikamaru called out to him. Whether you like it or not, we're not giving you a choice in the matter, Naruto. You're going to be staying with one of us after your operation. We'll be at the hospital this Saturday waiting for you to get out of surgery. You hear me? Shikamaru told Naruto. Naruto gave a non-committed shrug without looking back. Leaping up into the air, he landed lightly on the fence before leaping once more and landing on the rooftops of the Leaf Village's Ninja Academy. Little did the Do in the park know that Naruto wouldn't be going to the hospital. On his way back from talking with Shikamaru and Choji, Naruto searched the market district he'd been in that afternoon for his check and any remaining groceries. It was unfortunate for him that Tora-san had gone home already, so if the old woman had managed to pick anything up he wouldn't know until the next day. He found nothing on the streets. None of his groceries and no check. 4 weekends of hard work destroyed in a matter of minutes. Grim-faced Naruto made his way back to Iruka's home. To his dismay, the young Chunin sat in the kitchen, flour on his face, with a beautifully cooked dinner on the table. Lemon chicken set up in the middle of the table with a serving of cooked broccoli and corn for sides. Naruto felt his stomach turn with hunger. Garuko yipped happily, despite the fact that he'd eaten his fill of meat that day already, and begged shamelessly at Iruka's feet. The smell was unbearable. It was mouthwatering. Iruka's smile was so warm and kind. Naruto unconsciously let his right hand touch his disgusting, growling stomach. God, he wished it would stop. It was embarrassing, as if he were begging to be fed and fattened. Naruto felt himself blush horribly as the sound of another growl filled the air. Iruka laughed good-naturedly. Well, it sounds like someone's hungry. Come, sit and eat, Iruka said happily. Naruto hesitantly sat down. You didn't have to cook all this, Iruka-sensei, Naruto put forth. Nonsense. You're a growing boy. You need to eat a good meal outside of that junk you have in your home, Iruka said with teasing sternness. The only way I grow seems to be outwards, Naruto thought sullenly as he stared at the food. Iruka placed his food on his own plate before looking at his young charge expectantly. Naruto bit his lip before putting a small portion of each delicacy onto his own plate. Iruka frowned, causing Naruto to double-check the portions. Did I take too much? Naruto thought stiffly. Naruto, is that all you're going to eat? You didn't get very much, Iruka asked in concern. Confused Naruto could only nod. Iruka took a bite, a look of contemplation on his face. You know, I really won't be able to eat all of this by myself. I made enough for 3 people, not me and the dog, Iruka remarked with a wink. If you feel embarrassed about eating at my house, don't be. You're more than welcome to have anything in my home, Naruto, Iruka explained casually. Thank you, Iruka-sensei, Naruto responded meekly. Naruto took a bite. It was absolutely delicious. It made him realize just how hungry he was. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. He wouldn't eat much, just what was on his plate. Naruto savored each piece, telling Iruka how good it was after each one, leaving the older male with a bright smile on his face. Even the vegetables, steamed with special herbs, tasted good. Naruto was very aware of the giant bulge his stomach was becoming, though. He could practically feel the slimy fat touching the edge of his pants. Naruto put the fork down when he ate the last of the corn. His eyes shamefully pondered just how fast he'd eaten it all, like a pig eating his slop. He eyed just how white the plate looked. Not a speck of food left. He would be meeting Zine tomorrow night. He'd just have to work extra hard after he got out of the office for the day tomorrow. There's nothing worse than a fat whore. Your body flabs moving all over the place. Disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself. But like the fat fuck you are, you're just gonna go home and stuff yourself again. Zine's cruel words whispered. Naruto jerked in surprise when something plonked onto his plate. There was another piece of chicken and some more broccoli on his plate. Naruto looked at Iruka questioningly. Eat up, you're obviously still hungry. I told you that you don't need to be so formal and polite in my house. If you need anything now or in the middle of the night, just get up and get it. Iruka explained happily. I don't need all this. Naruto tried to protest. Really, Iruka-sensei, my first plate was more than enough. The blonde only just barely managed to keep the rising panic out of his voice. Iruka frowned. If you don't like the food, you can just say something, Naruto. I've got plenty of other things I can cook up for you, Iruka suggested. No, your food's amazing. I'm just not all that hungry, Naruto explained. At that moment his stupid, loathsome stomach decided to make itself known again with a rather loud growl. He was still hungry, but he'd worked so hard to get rid of his bloated, oversized stomach that he refused to give in to it. Iruka frowned at him. Really, Naruto, I can make you something else, the man said kindly. Naruto shook his head in defeat. He'd just have to work really hard in training tomorrow and skip dinner altogether. He ate the whole plate. Again, he felt so heavy and gross. He couldn't disappoint Iruka though. He refused to ever hurt the man in any way. Naruto examined himself in the bedroom mirror, eyes staring dismally at his stomach. It seemed to have grown since he'd started eating dinner. He'd been such a pig and it had felt good to be one. His stomach had stopped hurting now and he was forced to admit he liked the feeling. He remembered how much he'd liked it before too, when his gullet had hung over his pants and ass had been tight against his backside. He wouldn't let that happen again. He ended up sleeping in one of Iruka's oversized shirts. The man claimed Naruto could get his clothes in the morning. Garuko knew better though. Iruka was reluctant to let Naruto out of his sights after the startling revelation about the condition of Naruto's heart. Iruka insisted that Naruto stay at his home until the surgery and that he would stay with Naruto the entire time he was in the emergency room of the tower. After their long talk, Iruka had sent a message through a jutsu, which he refused to teach to Naruto until he reached Chunin level because of protocol, telling Shizune of events and that Naruto would be with him. Iruka had been hesitant to allow Naruto to go out, but Naruto had given him what he dubbed as the look. The look was something that Iruka knew must have been inherited somehow, in some way from the Tsudaime, despite lack of blood between the two of them. It was an icy, stern look that told whoever was unfortunate enough to garner its attention that there would be no discussion on the subject. The first time he'd ever found himself in its view was actually back in the academy as a child after one of his own pranks. The Tsudaime Hokage had been there for a lecture, as he often did after he retired from his cagehood, but was forced to cut back on due to the Yodaim's unexpected death. Coincidentally, Iruka first encountered the look from Naruto in the academy as well. Only this time the roles were reversed in more ways than one. Naruto had placed more than a dozen non-poisonous garden snakes into the desk of a teacher named Kurama. The woman had been hysterical, apparently having an unhealthy fear of snakes because of a certain purple-haired Junin, and sentenced Naruto to 3 weeks of detention. Iruka had been the one to oversee the boy's punishment after school due to Lady Kurama's resolute refusal to be alone in the same room as the boy. It had been the first time encountering the boy, and he'd walked in knowing that the troublemaker would be entering his classroom immediately after the winter break ended. He'd been apprehensive about meeting the child that contained the Kyuubi and, he would admit to himself, with a bit of prejudice behind that hesitance. It had shocked him more than a little to walk into the classroom to see a book in the boy's hands, sitting quietly, reading. He recognized the bright blonde hair and whiskers immediately, but because the boy was leaned over so far his eyes were hidden from the man. When the young blonde noticed his presence there was no obvious show of acknowledgement, only a small jerk of the shoulders, possibly in startlement. He hurriedly put the book into his backpack and given him a cheesy grin so wide that his eyes squinted. "Hiya teach, you the one that picked the shortest straw, huh?" The boy greeted. Iruka's left eye twitched. "You need to learn to respect your elders, Uzumaki. This kind of behavior is unacceptable." "Sir, yes sir," the blonde replied with a mock salute. Iruka shook his head in disapproval, sitting down at Kurama's normal desk, before going into his box of papers he'd brought from his office for his own students' essays. Just because he had detention duty did not mean he would waste the time given. He didn't think he'd get much done since he suspected the troublemaker would be making numerous attempts to get away from his punishment, but there was no reason not to try. Rather than make a jumble of noise though Naruto sat calmly, eyes staring at the ceiling, the occasional fidget here and there showing the boy's discomfort. Iruka peeked up every few minutes to find no changes for the first 20 minutes. By the time half an hour passed Iruka looked up once again to find his charge had fallen asleep with his head on the desk. Iruka shook his head, contemplating the merits of waking the boy up. After all it was a punishment not nap time. On the other hand he had behaved well so far. Iruka peered quietly over the boy's form. He certainly didn't look evil. In fact he seemed to fall into the scrawny category. The backpack the boy was carrying looked as if it had been picked out of the trash. Small holes were in the bottom and dirt fell off it in flakes. The child was a troublemaker, so it was very possible that he dragged it through the mud and up trees in his gallivanting. Still, he looked absolutely exhausted. Iruka sighed. There was paperwork to get done anyway, and if Naruto was asleep he wouldn't have to worry about anything. The next day detention was just as peaceful, as well as the day after that, the only interruption being the less than polite greeting and reply. On the fourth day Naruto cautiously pulled out a few papers and started to write on them. Iruka certainly wasn't going to bother him for a positive action, so let it be. The whole second week of detention passed in this fashion as well. Iruka working on his students turned in assignments while Naruto worked on whatever. The last day of the second week came with a small change though. Instead of quietly scribbling on his papers, Naruto appeared to be frustrated on one spot. Every few seconds the pencil would turn upside down and erase something accompanied by a muttered curse. The blonde chewed his lip the entire time, and when a small trail of blood dripped down the side of his chin Iruka decided that it was time to intervene. The young man stood up from his desk and quietly moved behind the blonde child. The paper he was scribbling on looked to be a homework assignment from Kurama. It was an introduction to the more finer details that targeting an enemy required when using weapons. Something was off though. The calculations the boy was using to find the answers was completely wrong. The boy's math was right, but the method to find the answers were severely off track. Iruka watched with confusion as Naruto silently tapped his fingers against his palm, a gesture of counting, before writing the numbers down. He was trying to figure out from which position in the X's, obvious symbols for trees, that would be the quickest way to hit the target. Iruka tried not to laugh when he noticed the target had a pair of glasses drawn on it that looked suspiciously like Lady Kurama's glasses. The problem was that Naruto was bringing the numbers to the left of the equation when he should have first divided the number and then moved it to the right instead. Iruka grimaced as yet another vile curse slipped from Naruto as the boy once more came to the wrong answer. It could easily be seen as the wrong answer because the trajectory, when putting in those coordinates, showed itself far from the target. Kurama was supposed to be giving the children broad guesswork to get them prepared for the foundation of trajectory training. This meant drawing accurate triangles with one point on the figure supposed to be U and the other two measured out to show the area that the kunai should land if the child's calculations were right. It was simple fast math in order to allow beginners to become accustomed to the idea of throwing a weapon with deadly accuracy that would eventually lead into reflexive memory when spotting an enemy. Iruka decided to have pity on the poor academy student in front of him, who was concentrating so hard he had yet to realize his future sensei was behind him rather than in front of him, and tapped him on the shoulder. The moment his finger touched the child's shoulder, he viciously flinched. The boy attempted to jump up and sideways at the same time, but his feet tangled in the awkward movement. Naruto landed on the floor in a heap before hurriedly twisting around. Startled bright blue eyes gazed into his soft brown for a moment before taking a quick peek at the desk and back again. Geez, how'd you?" Naruto muttered, softly patting his heart while looking back and forth. "You weren't paying attention, so it was quite easy." Right. Need help?" Iruka asked in an amused tone. "I can get up just fine," came the snappish reply. "I meant with the assignment." "Oh, no, not really, I got it," Naruto replied with a heavy blush. "It didn't look that way to me," Iruka said quietly as he bent down to offer Naruto a hand despite his earlier words. Naruto ignored the offered hand and stood up on his own, his eyes trained on the paper. "I don't need help," Naruto repeated. His voice was angry. Naruto abruptly sat down without another word, putting the assignment into his bag, pointedly ignoring Iruka's confused expression for the rest of detention. The next week came quickly, and on the last day together before winter break, Iruka asked the question that had been bugging him for a while. "Naruto, why did you pull that prank on Lady Kurama? You knew she was afraid of snakes, right? You don't seem like the malicious type," Iruka asked as Naruto began to pack his most recent homework assignment. Naruto was quiet for several long moments, and Iruka figured that the child wasn't going to answer, but then Naruto swung his backpack across his shoulder and looked at Iruka. "Sometimes people have to be reminded that doing mean things to others for no reason has consequences," Naruto answered. Iruka was confused. "That's the exact reason you're here, Naruto." Blonde bangs fell loosely in front of the child's eyes. "Do you know what the meanest thing you can do to a person is?" Naruto asked. "What?" Iruka asked tiredly. Naruto's apparent indifference to the situation was really wearing on his nerves. "Pretending to be nice. If you're just mean, then it's easier cause you expect them to be. It's when you're not expecting it, that's when it's really mean," Naruto answered before moving toward the door. "Is that what Lady Kurama did?" Iruka asked quietly. Naruto looked over his shoulder at the academy teacher before him with icy blue eyes that caused Iruka's breath to hitch in surprise. They were defiant and critical as they observed him, as if daring him to try to figure it out, while simultaneously warning him not to. "Maybe, it don't matter much though. Nothing ever does, really, when you're the only one who gives a fuck." Iruka couldn't argue with that logic. The dog had felt a painful sense of déjà vu when Naruto talked about his heart. He'd felt himself get dizzy, and an image of Shizune across the table from a worn-out Naruto slammed into his vision before disappearing. Garuko had given himself a good shake-off before deciding that he'd think about it later, when his head didn't hurt as much. Unfortunately for the Chunin instructor, Wednesday morning shined much sooner than he liked. Garuko couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity at the instructor's mother-hen behavior, but for the life of him he couldn't place who it reminded him of. The door down the hall creaked and out stepped Naruto. The blonde was wearing a pair of very worn brown pants from Iruka's own genin days and a long-sleeved, black shirt from when the man first became a Chunin. The sleeves ran several inches past Naruto's fingertips, causing the blonde to pull the sleeve up every few minutes. It was difficult to see in the dim light of the early morning sun, but Naruto was wearing his chakra crystal over the shirt today rather than under it as he normally preferred. "Iruka, we're heading out," Naruto called. Garuko nearly tripped over his own feet when Iruka suddenly appeared in front of them with a frying pan in one hand and a carton of milk in the other. "You know I could just go to your apartment and get it. Maybe you should just stay here," Iruka suggested fretfully. Naruto rolled his eyes and winked at Garuko, a mischievous glint in the young genin's eyes. Garuko blinked in surprise and looked at Naruto in confusion, not used to the casual and calm attitude the blonde displayed. Naruto sighed tiredly as if remembering something and walked over to Iruka. "I've had my heart problem for a while, including all the time I've been a genin and in the academy. I'm not gonna kill over from your house to mine," Naruto explained patiently. Iruka raised his right hand, along with the frying pan, towards Naruto and pointed it as if they were still in the classroom and he was lecturing a student and the pan was his ruler. Garuko snickered at the view. "Heart damage is a serious matter, Naruto. The fact that you've been going on missions in your condition is not an indication that nothing will happen but a danger for it to get worse," Iruka said in exasperation, his pan jabbing in Naruto's direction every few words. "Even Tsunade said that the damage isn't that bad," Naruto pointed out as he tied his forehead protector around head. "Tsunade also told you that any attack against you right now could further worsen your condition," Iruka shot back. "Stop referring to it as condition. You're making me sound like I'm on my deathbed. And it will only worsen if someone attacks my heart directly. It's not like some Hyuga's gonna come up to me and strike me in the heart on my way to my apartment," Naruto said with a rueful grin. "HMFF," Iruka replied. The man turned around and re-entered his kitchen area, placing the pan and milk on the counter, before calling out once more. "Just make sure you're back in half an hour. I'm making French toast." "Thanks, Iruka. I'll be back soon," Naruto answered with a small smile on his face. "Nothing will happen. I'll bite any Hyugas that comes close," Garuko cackled out as he followed Naruto out the door. "Damn dog is just as irritating as Kakashi," Iruka muttered to himself as he measured the milk. Garuko wasn't sure what seemed different about Naruto today, but if he was forced to place it in words he would describe him as more put together. Yes, that was it. The last week or so Naruto had been tense and everything he did was with a strained smile and foreboding air that had the dog on edge. When the paint attack hit Naruto, Garuko nearly had a heart attack and almost bit a few of the bystanders in his way. To see Naruto's body flickered off with a Junin he did not recognize also sent the dog into a fit of panic. It was like the shadows Naruto had been jumping at all week had suddenly been made real. Getting to the academy where Naruto's smell led to was an immense relief, but the dull blue eyes looking blankly ahead as Iruka led Naruto to his home had been unwelcome and frightening. Truth be told, Garuko had been somewhat relieved to hear Naruto tell Iruka about the heart operation. Not because he believed the heart damage to be inconsequential, but to finally know what it was that had been bothering him all week. It had been maddening to see Naruto so nerve-wracked without knowing the reason why. Like one of the cats he preyed upon in his free time, the cats knew he was there, damn their sixth sense, but didn't know from what direction. Today he was different. He was playful and carefree and just all around better off than before. It seemed that just being with Iruka had made all of his tension go away. This Naruto was much more enjoyable to be around. He wasn't being idiotic, merely happy, nor was he in a scarily quiet mood. "Hey Garuko," Naruto called as they walked toward his apartment. "Yes? How'd Kaka-sensei get the dog summoning contract?" Garuko nearly stumbled over his front paws in surprise. "A bit left field, isn't that?" Garuko replied instead. I was just thinking that it seemed kinda weird for him to have it. It seems more like something the Inuzukas would have," Naruto elaborated. Garuko quirked one furry eyebrow, but simply complied. "The Hitakis have always had the dog summoning contract. The head of the Inuzuka clan possesses the wolf summoning contract. Just as you and Jiraiya possess the toad summoning contract, there is also a frog summoning contract, though that is in a completely different village," Garuko explained. Naruto slowly shook his head in understanding, but there was still some confusion shadowing his face. "But aren't you part wolf, Garuko? How can Kaka-sensei summon you then?" Garuko let out a barking laugh. "I am part Akita, half, not wolf," Garuko stated proudly. Naruto blinked. "In the fire country? I thought Akitas were more prone to cold areas, like the old land of snow," Naruto said thoughtfully. "I said half Akita. My fur isn't nearly as thick as a full-blood's," Garuko said as way of explanation. "Why are you so interested in this stuff though?" The dog pressed again. Naruto squirmed under the dog's scrutiny. There was something that was bothering me, but it was really shallow, Naruto admitted. The blonde began to chew on his lip while watching the clouds floating by up above. Everyone deserves a shallow thought every once in a while. It's those who don't recognize that they've had a shallow thought that tend to repeat the action over and over again, Garuko said wisely. Where'd you get that? A fortune cookie? Naruto teased. Garuko pouted. I heard Shikaku say it to his wife once. Garuko mumbled. Naruto laughed. So, what was this shallow thought anyway? You can't just leave it at that. The dog nudged. Naruto sighed and stretched his arms up into the sky before bringing them behind his head to rest. I guess, I was just thinking, Kaka-sensei's going to have Sasuke sign the dog summoning contract, right? Sasuke showed the most potential for tracking after all and Naruto trailed off. Garuko frowned. Kakashi had in fact talked to them about it once shortly after the Chunin exams ended. The gray-haired man had asked them what they thought of the idea, and for the most part the pack had seemed happy about the prospect of Kakashi's students. Now though, Garuko felt a twinge of something he didn't recognize. He couldn't understand why it was there. Sasuke was a good kid with skills and intelligence to match his teacher and a latent potential for tracking. Sasuke would make for great trainee summoner. Kakashi has not approached Sasuke with the offer, but that is his intention. Garuko answered. Naruto's face fell into a frown, but the blonde just grimaced before giving the dog walking beside him a grin. Thought so. So Sasuke has Sakura, Kakashi and Yo, the dog summons. Sasuke inherited the Chidori from Kaka-sensei and Sakura inherited his taijutsu style. I didn't get anything. He. Kakashi has taught all three of you a lot, Garuko said, disgruntled. Yeah, he has. I told you it was shallow, Naruto said meekly as they continued on. You are the one who's choosing to leave the team, Garuko pointed out. I'm sure that if you stay then Kakashi will eventually hand down something to you. The dog amended. Naruto had warned him it was shallow. It was just that it was about one of his pack mates. Naruto patted the dog's head affectionately. Actually, Kaka-sensei did teach me a lot about comradeship and friendship. I don't think he'll ever forget the lessons he taught me in that. Besides, lightning is totally Sasuke's style and Sakura was the perfect chose for his taijutsu and what would I know about taking care of animals, right? Naruto asked teasingly. They both stopped when they stood in front of Naruto's door. Naruto puffed out his cheeks in annoyance as he dug into the pocket of Iruka's borrowed pants to find his keys. Garuko's sharp ears picked up the sound of a jingle as keys shifted in the left pocket. Naruto held the knob and put the key in only to stare in confusion as he twisted metal into metal. It's already unlocked, Naruto whispered. Naruto swiftly bent down and clipped the kunai off of its ostler beneath his left pant leg. His breathing slowed to deep even breaths. Garuko went on edge immediately. A fact that many people didn't know about Naruto Uzumaki would be that he is excessively paranoid. He never leaves his apartment unlocked. Checks the windows while watering his plants to make sure they're locked and secure. Has a seal on the inside by the knob to tell him if anyone attempted to force their way into his home. The one time Naruto forgot to close the window when he followed the blonde to the bar had left Jinchuriki double-checking everything for the next week. Garuko had noticed this flaw before having his memories taken from him, but in his current condition was left wondering why Naruto suddenly seemed to have reverted back to the depressed, tense individual of the past week. The dog bent low and kept quiet as Naruto cautiously pushed the door open all the way. Garuko stiffened. Above him his companion visibly frowned and narrowed icy blue eyes. Garuko sniffed the air. The smell of oak wood and fine brandy filled the air. It was strangely familiar. Naruto's hand gingerly reached out and flipped the light switch beside the door. The room was flooded with light. Garuko let out a low growl. Naruto simply moved in slowly, taking everything in. The table was overturned. All the cabinets were wide open and the dishes toppled over and broken. Garuko watched as Naruto's eyes moved to the seal by the knob. Blue eyes widened in horror. No one forced their way in. The seal still shimmered blue. Garuko watched as Naruto whirled around, all caution seemingly gone, and flew toward his bedroom door. The torn curtain that used to make up the door was hazardly ripped out of the way as the blonde disappeared. Garuko followed. From the room beyond, Garuko heard a heart-wrenching scream followed by a thud. The dog burst forth through the doorway, intent on attacking the intruder, only to come to an abrupt stop. Naruto was the only one in the room. The blonde had fallen to his knees and legs spread out wide on either side of him as he stared at a gaping hole in the floor. A large plank sat broken in two on either side of the hole. Garuko cautiously approached the blonde, whose back was to him, unmoving. "Naruto?" Garuko whispered. The room was trashed, books and scrolls thrown about, the dresser knocked over, and feathers from several pillows floating around the room. The bed had been moved several feet, and the blonde's poster of the leaf symbol had been torn down. All the potted plants in the room lay broken and dying, dirt spread generously across the floor. Yet no windows were broken. No sign of forced entry. "Naruto?" Garuko tried again, moving around the blonde. Naruto's face was eerily blank, lips slightly parted, hands at his sides with a visible tremor. Garuko was familiar with this state. Humans often went into a state of frozen nature when they've suddenly and drastically been overwhelmed by emotions. Kakashi called it shock. When the copycat would come upon a person in this state, depending on if they were both out of danger for the moment, he would gently move them away from the scene and talk softly. Garuko gently nudged Naruto, confused by the boy's reaction. "What's wrong, Naruto?" Garuko asked. Naruto just stared down at the hole in the floor. His eyes moved back and forth, from one end of the rather small hole to the other end, as if he looked hard enough, the thing he looked for would reappear. "It's gone," Naruto whispered in stunned horror. "What's gone?" Garuko asked. "My money. Everything's gone now, of my hard work. All my effort, 3 years, it will. I can't, this Maya, happening, not." Naruto began babbling incoherently. Garuko attempted several times to snap the blonde out of it, but nothing was working. Barking and licking his face did nothing. Trying to calm him down through talking was beyond meaningless. Nudging and pulling was useless. Should he try to go get someone? What if whoever did this came back though? "Oh God, oh fuck." Ellipsis quote. Naruto's voice abruptly brought him out of his thoughts as it rose in volume. Out of shock and into hysterics. "Fuck, fuck, fuck. I am so fucked. Oh God, I can't. I won't." Naruto's loud voice rang out. Garuko snarled viciously before letting out a terrifying growl. Naruto immediately fell quiet and stared at the dog in bewilderment, as if just realizing that there was someone there besides himself. "I know you're better than this, Naruto. Now calm down and tell me what the problem is so that we can go about fixing it," Garuko demanded. Naruto was still trembling, but he at least began to take deep calming breaths and no longer yelling. Garuko watched as Naruto began twisting the front of Iruka's shirt in an attempt to release some of the bent-up tension, but the strategy didn't seem to be working very well because the blonde still looked on the verge of a breakdown. Naruto suddenly stood straight up off the ground, looking around dazedly whilst his hands still clutched his shirt tightly. "Garuko, can you please go inform Granny Tsunade about this?" Naruto asked quietly. Garuko nodded hurriedly but kept his eyes on the blonde wearily. "Why don't you do it?" Garuko asked. I need to go let out some steam. I'm going to go train," Naruto explained distractedly. "You're not supposed to be doing that kind of stuff until after your surgery," Garuko pointed out, "and besides that, Iruka is going to be really worried about you," the dog added. Naruto merely nodded before walking out the door, far too gone to listen, much less argue. Garuko heaved a giant sigh before quietly obeying. He wouldn't get anything out of the blonde right now anyway. He'd question him again when he got back from the tower. Garuko made his way to Training Ground 13, where Naruto's smell was leading him to. It had taken 2 hours to explain the situation to Tsunade, who had been raving mad at the break-in. She sent out Izumo and Kotetsu immediately to investigate and forced Garuko to explain the whole thing to her twice. So now here he was making his way to Naruto, who, by the way, didn't even bother to come help him explain a break-in to the blonde's own apartment. The dog sighed heavily. It was to be expected, he supposed. The Jinchuriki had been quite hit by the trashed apartment and whatever the robbers had taken. "Ah," Garuko heard Naruto's voice call out from one of the training grounds clearings. The sound of a large bang resounded through the forest as Garuko picked up his speed and birds scattered from the trees. The dog leapt into the clearing to find Naruto barely standing. The trees surrounding them were emblazoned with spiral marks while others simply had chunks missing. Naruto himself was covered from head to toe in scrapes and dirt as the blonde held his left hand in front of him. Chakra began to spin in the palm of the blonde's hand before a half-formed Rasengan took shape. Naruto sprang forth at the closest tree with a vicious glee. "Ra!" Naruto screamed as he slammed his palm into the tree again. A huge chunk came loose and spun off, slicing a thin cut along Naruto's neck before it plunked against the ground. It wasn't perfect though. The hole the chunk came from was small and rough. The damage from a fully formed Rasengan would have done a lot more damage and with far more refined shape. Garuko knew and had seen Naruto practicing the one-handed Rasengan for the last 3 weeks, but it had never been this intense or ruthless in execution. Naruto staggered back from the attempt. Angry, icy blue eyes stared at the product of his work in dissatisfaction. Garuko shuffled from paw to paw. He wasn't sure he wanted to interrupt Naruto at that particular moment. Again and again Naruto formed half-shaped Rasengans and slammed them into the surrounding trees. The anger radiated off Garuko's young friend as if he were on fire. Killing intent filled the clearing to the point that Garuko found it difficult to breathe. There was another time, wasn't there? More times that this has occurred than just today, Garuko thought fuzzily. This anger wasn't just formed from the break-in. It was deeper. Garuko wasn't sure how he could sense this, but suddenly he knew with absolute certainty that it was true. A dull thud began to beat against his skull. An image formed of Naruto throwing kunai with great force against trees. Anger, resentment and frustration fueling every throw. Garuko tried to remember why the blonde had been so angry, but the reason seemed to be slipping away. With another one of Naruto's anger-filled screams, the thought and bleary memory was gone. Garuko blinked sluggishly before gazing at Naruto again. Naruto once more staggered to his feet. His body quivered with the strain, but a fierce anger and hurt urged the body up again. Garuko wished desperately that he could help, but for the life of him he didn't know what was wrong. Surely whatever was stolen couldn't have been that important. Garuko winced as sharp, wooden splinters entered Naruto's hand as the Rasengan struck against the newest innocent tree. Naruto must not have been concentrating right, because a large spiral had been formed rather than a chunk being taken out. Naruto let out a frustrated feral growl of frustration. More splinters, more chunks, more yells and screams echoing in the empty forest area. It didn't seem as if Naruto's anger possessed an end. Naruto's breaths came out ragged as he straightened again. Garuko whined, but stayed still. The young genin looked as if he would lash out at anyone stupid enough to interfere. Naruto once more held his hand out and closed his eyes in deep concentration. Chakras swirled faster and faster, twirling in all directions until a near-perfect ball formed. Naruto opened his eyes and charged headlong toward a dilapidated tree. "Ra!" came the scream once more. The ball pierced the tree as if it were made out of jello, but rather than pass through it fully as a perfect Rasengan would, it only sank halfway through. Splinters entered Naruto's skin mercilessly as they flew from the trunk, but Garuko didn't think that Naruto even noticed. The large tree swayed backwards, and for a moment it seemed as if the thing would break that way, but at the last moment it swayed forwards and snapped. Naruto staggered backwards, attempting to move out of its way, but he tripped over one of the wood chunks he'd made earlier and fell on his butt. The hand that performed the nearly perfect Rasengan smoking from chakra burns. Garuko felt his pulse race as the shadow of the falling tree fell directly across Naruto's worn-out face. Yet strangely there wasn't any fear played out on his features, just surprise, as the thing came tumbling down. Garuko dashed forward. The dog bit down on Naruto's closest hand and dragged him into the earth just as the trunk slammed to the forest floor. Moments passed in the wooded area without any further disturbance before the sound of leaves crumbling filled the space. Several feet away, a dog's nose materialized out of the ground and sniffed the air. Satisfied, an entire head formed with a slightly bloody hand in its mouth. Garuko pulled himself fully out of the ground before tugging a sputtering and gasping Naruto along with him. The entire Hatake dogpack were earth element summons, just as the toads were water and weasels wind. They could travel just as easily beneath the ground as they could above. It was how they caught Zabuza at the last second without the missed Junin knowing about their approach, and it was now how he'd managed to save Naruto's life. Thanks, Naruto croaked out. Then Naruto did the unthinkable. He stood up, staggering a bit, before attempting to perform the Rasengan again. Naruto, what do you think you're doing? Garuko growled out. The dog tugged hard on Naruto's pant leg, but the human pulled away from him. Garuko growled at the boy. He was astounded really. Naruto's hands were bloody. The boy's body was covered from head to toe in sweat. There were numerous tears in Iruka's old clothes where wooden debris skimmed harshly across tan flesh. It really did surprise Garuko that Naruto was still standing. Naruto wavered on his feet before taking a large breath and thrusting his palm out in front of him. Chakra swirled like a tiny tornado in the boy's palm before dying away. Naruto grunted in anger before attempting again and then again until his legs gave out on him and he was kneeling on the ground. Anger still leaked out though. Even though the blonde was grounded, he was not even slightly ready to give up. Out of chakra? Garuko asked with a smirk. Finally it was over. Naruto would have to stop at this point and take a break. At least until his chakra regained itself. Naruto didn't seem nearly as happy about the lack of chakra as Garuko did. The blonde glared down at his palm venomously. Garuko watched Naruto weightily. The blonde placed his hands on the ground and pushed himself up unsteadily. Wobbling to his feet, Naruto took heavy breaths before he moved in front of one of the trees and settled into the basic academy taijutsu form. Without further prompting, he swung his left leg out and into a mid-level kick aimed for a person's ribcage. It was swung with such ferociousness that Garuko was almost afraid that Naruto broke his leg with the resounding thud that echoed through the forest. Naruto, this is ridiculous. Whack. You're going to seriously injure yourself this way. Whack. Training when you're this angry is very dangerous, Naruto. Whack. Your chakra levels are dangerously low. Whack. You're exhausted. Whack. You're injured as well. Whack. God damn it, Naruto, if you don't stop training this instant I will bite you and drag you to Iruka's. Naruto refused to reply to him. Instead he continued to slam his leg against the tree's trunk. I warned him, Garuko thought as he moved closer. The dog paused and his neck stiffened as a distinct smell entered his nose. Spandex, medicine balls, turtles, leaves appeared to burst forth from out of nowhere in a vortex. Garuko noticed that Naruto had yet to realize what was going on due to how focused he was on decimating the tree in front of him. A part of the dog shuddered, but another part was grateful. He would be able to handle the blonde. Hello my youthful young friends. What brings you to my training grounds this fine late morning? Guy demanded in his normally cheerful voice. The exuberant man scanned the area for the first time and exhaled softly. His eyes narrowed as he took in Naruto's heavily battered form. Whether Naruto noticed Guy's presence or not, Garuko wasn't sure because the young Jinchuriki didn't so much as falter in his brutal kicks against the tree. Guy walked over slowly, going around until he was looking Naruto directly in the face, before the man's own face became stern. Garuko mentally sighed in relief. Guy would handle this. The man was very good with handling emotional kids. That said, it was yet another thing that Guy and his Kakashi were opposing forces for. Kakashi sucked ass at handling his own emotions, much less his 3 charges. Naruto staggered back again before stepping forward and attempting another kick. Naruto's leg never made contact with wood though, because Guy's hand held it firmly yet gently still. So caught off guard was the blonde from the sudden appearance and stopping in motion that Naruto lost what little balance he had left and fell hard back onto his butt. Guy carefully set his leg down even as Naruto painfully twisted his body so that he was facing the ground on all fours rather than sitting on his butt. Don't you believe that is more than enough, Naruto-kun? Guy asked lightly. Naruto stiffened at the honorific before shaking his head. Garuko trotted up to Naruto and licked his heaving frame. Each breath seemed to be a struggle. Sweat slid down the boy's face before dripping to the dirt floor below. Cough, cough, cough. Naruto hacked as he tried to catch his breath. Guy bent down and patted Naruto's back, but the man's big hands were pushed aside as Naruto tried to stand again. That's enough, Naruto, Guy stated sternly. It's one thing to train and another to kill yourself. Naruto wouldn't listen though. His whole body trembling, Naruto stumbled to his feet. Garuko whined, tugging on Naruto's pant legs, but was roughly pulled away from. Guy also stood. The man's face was stony, all cheer and foolishness gone. Guy moved forward and placed a firm hand on Naruto's shoulder, stopping the boy in his tracks. Naruto tried to shift out of it, away from Guy, but the man's grip remained steady. "Get your hand off of me," Naruto gritted out without looking up. Garuko could tell that Guy heard the anger and frustration in Naruto's voice because the man's body tensed slightly. Guy moved in front of Naruto, never allowing his hand to lift from the blonde's shoulders, to kneel directly in front of the boy. "Do you want to tell me what's wrong, Naruto? Taking out anger on your body can be a very dangerous outlet even if it does make you feel better," Guy asked softly. "Let go of me," Naruto demanded through grit teeth. Grim-faced Guy silently shook his head no. Naruto struggled against Guy's hold then, tugging, pulling, twisting. At one point he even attempted to smash his forehead into Guy's, but the man held firm until Naruto let out a scream of frustration and crumbled to the ground with knees spread out before him. For a long moment only Naruto's heavy, ragged breathing filled the air before Guy spoke. "I think I'm going to take you to the hospital so that they can treat you for these injuries," Guy informed the two of them solemnly. Naruto froze, and for a long moment the boy didn't take in a single breath. An almost silent exhale tumbled from the blonde's mouth, and with it Naruto's body fell forward. Guy moved in immediately, worried that Naruto was in more medical need than he'd anticipated, before jumping back with a shocked curse. Naruto staggered to his feet, the remains of the sand he'd thrown into Guy's eyes falling through his fingertips even as he took off toward the village. Garuko took several seconds to comprehend what just happened before he took after the blonde. Guy furiously wiped at his eyes before his body blurred into motion. The green jumpsuit-wearing man reappeared in front Naruto. The blonde, his head turned where Guy once was, careened straight into the man. Naruto fell to the ground in a heap, hands scraping for more dirt, but Guy wouldn't allow himself to fall for the same trick twice. Guy pinned Naruto's arms to the ground as gently as he could. Garuko raced up to the pair, watching as Guy peered carefully at Naruto with a searching look. "Let go of me," Naruto screamed up at them. Naruto fought tiredly, but it was obvious that he was losing the last bit of adrenaline-powered strength he had left. Guy gave Garuko a pointed look, demanding to know what the hell was going on, and being one of Kakashi's longtime friends, Garuko knew Guy was trustworthy enough to know. Naruto's home was broken into and pretty much everything destroyed. "He came out here to let out some steam," Garuko answered, though truthfully he believed that it was something deeper, something to do with whatever the robber stole. Guy's eyes saddened as he nodded in understanding before looking at Naruto. "Please," Naruto begged, and something in his voice scared both Garuko and Guy. "Please don't touch me. Just, please let go of me." Garuko felt something stir inside of him. The dull thud returned, but quickly turned into a drumbeat against his skull. Guy tried smiling at the blonde reassuringly. "I need to take you to the hospital, Naruto. If not for your chakra burns and cuts, then for your shock-induced hysteria." Guy spoke patiently. Another quality Kakashi didn't possess, Garuko noted with amusement. The dog tried to focus further on the conversation through his headache, but it was growing increasingly difficult. An unexpected spike in chakra fixed that problem quickly enough. A huge wave of red chakra slammed into man and dog, sending them both backwards through the forest. Garuko landed harshly against the ground, the breath temporarily taken from him, while Guy was not so lucky. The man ended up striking his head against the tree, and though he was not out for the count, it would be a number of minutes before he was travel capable. Naruto stood up. His body no longer trembled, and an eerie red glow cast itself from blood-red eyes. Naruto took off, body moving in spades rather than paces. Garuko allowed himself a few precious moments to recover before picking up the trail and following the blonde at an admittedly much more sedated pace due to the floor moving up and down on him. "What do you want, Zine?" "There are some people that I owe and a certain payment needs to be given." "What does that have to do with me?" "You haven't paid your rent yet this month, Naruto." "I get my check tomorrow, I'll have it for you." "Not good enough. I think you need to be punished for being so high and mighty with me lately." "Tight little slut, ain't he?" "Aw, he's terrified. Bet he's enjoying this more than we are." They were touching him everywhere. He screamed, bit every finger that came near his mouth, kicked every inch of skin he could reach, punched every face he saw. Blood flowed on top of him. He'd broken one of their noses. They were angry. He felt triumphant until his mouth was forced open and something caused him to gag. Turned over, puked. White stuff, more vomit. Skin on skin, rough, relentless, merciless, sharp, unbearable pain. Another scream, but his this time. A hand squeezed his face harshly. Little tramp, want some money? Paper was shoved into his mouth. He choked. Deep laughter. Can't be called a male anymore, can ya? I say he's more of a hussy. Nah, more like a hooker. More sophisticated than that, lads. A lady of the evenin'. Naruto clamped his hands over his ears as he ran, trying to block out the memories. The horrible things wouldn't go away. His legs felt heavy and his chest felt as if his heart wanted to wrench itself from its vein-like bounds and burst out of his chest. He felt hot tears fall down his cheeks, but paid them no mind. He needed to get far, far away. Far from Guy, who wanted to take him to the hospital. Far from Garuko, who seemed intent on making everything difficult. Far from Sasuke, who thought he was better than him and was right. Far from Sakura, who hated him even though all he'd ever tried to do was be her friend. Far from the Konohamaru Corps, because they were the only ones that ever accepted him absolutely without a thought. Because they didn't know about any of his past, and if they did they wouldn't want anything to do with him anymore. Even the thought of their small faces lit up in disgust at him was painful. Far from Shikamaru and Choji and their stupid idea that he wanted to be real but knew it wasn't. Just another tease. Far from Iruka, who cared too much about a dirty, worthless monster like him. Far from Shizune and Tsunade, because they were too close to knowing what had been done to him. What he'd allowed, cause he wasn't strong enough. Because he didn't fight hard enough. Far from Jiraiya, because now he wouldn't be able to leave with him anymore without the money, and it hurt so bad to know that. Far from Kakashi, because once again when he really needed his sensei he wasn't there to help him. Because there was always things that were much more important than helping him, and they both knew it. And how horrible he felt for being so unbelievably angry with the man at the same time, because, goddamn him, he had placed so much hope in his sensei. Far from every last one of them, because the thought of any of them knowing that he was a slut was too unbearable to think about. They all already thought he was a nuisance. A loud, brash idiot who couldn't do anything right. He couldn't bear the thought of losing every shred of pride and dignity he had left. He couldn't do it. He wasn't strong enough to handle it. So he ran. Head downcast and blazing red eyes squinted so small they looked closed so that the villagers couldn't see them. His fingers were curled up over his ears so that the claws were hidden from sight. He ran without any direction or hope. He desperately wished that he could turn back time and make it all go away. If he had a second chance he would have chosen to die on the snow-covered floors of home. When Naruto finally collapsed he was not at all surprised by the place he'd just moments before been thinking of. Funny how Naruto didn't remember going up any stairs. Snow did not just yet cover the planks within the old crumbling building. Winter was almost there, but still not quite. As Kyuubi's chakra faded from his chakra coils, Naruto crawled into one room in particular and curled up in the corner. Naruto breathed in deeply, the smell of rotting wood and mold unpleasant but somehow calming to the blonde. He was so tired, he could just sleep here forever without a care in the world. No demon sealed inside who would enjoy feasting on his bone marrow. No organization of dangerous criminals attempting to murder him. No Sasuke who liked to use people as punching bags. No Jiraiya to push him off cliffs or Tsunade to steal his money. No Fuji with a jealousy complex who likes to randomly hurt him. No wars or death or peace or life. Simple existence in its most basic form. And especially no Zain. Footsteps. Had Guy found him already? He'd thought he'd had at least 20 minutes. No, not Guy. They were lighter, much lighter. Naruto groaned. He didn't want to get up. He wanted to just lie there for eternity and wait for the residents to come back. Naruto, with a great deal of effort on his part, pushed himself into a seated position. I knew you would come here. Cold anger. The person leans against the door. Why were you looking for me in the first place? Naruto asked quietly. Straightening, he unsteadily shuffled to his feet. First on all fours, then on two. I'm going to kill you. Stated as a fact rather than an idea. Hardly seems fair. Can I ask why? Naruto asks as he lightly tugs on Kyuubi's chakra. He's gone. Left me for some bitch and sold the apartment building. Next month when rent time comes and I can't supply a home, the contract will break. The woman admits. The anger that radiates off her is icy cold. Perhaps, at some point in their strange relationship, she'd taught it to him. Naruto lets out a deep bitter laughter that the light brown-eyed woman bristles at. Well, I've got even more great news. I almost had enough money to break the contract with you, but it's all gone now. There's nothing left and I'd be willing to bet anything it was him. You'll never get your money and now you're all alone. Just like me. Naruto bites off the last words in angry satisfaction. Zine's silky black hair falls from behind her ears as the woman glares furiously at him. I'm nothing like you, you worthless piece of shit. Zine hisses out. Naruto just shakes his head at her as if he's speaking to a small child that never had simple things explained to them before. In a way he was. Zine had been a terrifying woman even in youth. She was unapproachable yet at the same time no one could deny her anything for fear of her wrath. In her self-made isolation she lost the ability to feel empathy and thus in the same way she cannot see how others feel she can also not understand how others view her. It is then the unfortunate case that her view of life itself is as distorted as she is twisted. Did you ever consider that maybe your loving husband offered you that proposal because he wanted an excuse to fuck as many women at the local whorehouse as possible? Naruto suggests lightly, eyes twinkling in mischief. 3 years she's done nothing but hurt and manipulate him, and now that there was no hope for escape, Naruto was finally free to say everything to her that he's ever wanted. Naruto used the wall behind him to brace his tired body even as Zine's killing intent fills the room. Chilling with a tinge of madness. She reminds him of his encounter with Orochimaru. Earth-style harp's claw. Zine screeches out in rage. The woman's hands blurred through hand signs, as to be expected from an Anbu captain, unleashing the jutsu in the blink of an eye. Naruto tried to dodge, but the earth claw that materialized from the wall smashed into him before he could leap away and threw him out of the room and against the hall's wall. Naruto felt his head and spine burst with a blinding pain even as he landed roughly on rotting wood. The boards groaned under the sudden thud of weight on top of them. Zine loomed over him with a menacing scowl. You don't know anything about him, you fat fucking slut. You shut your mouth right now. The woman screamed before smashing her boot down against Naruto's mouth. Naruto's scream of pain was muffled. Zine pushed down harder, the floorboards creaking under the pressure as Naruto pushed uselessly against her foot. As Naruto felt his panic grow, blue eyes bleed into red. Red chakras simmered to life before colliding with the woman above him. Zine let out a shriek of surprise and anger as she was flung backwards and skidded across the harsh broken wood beneath her. Naruto lurched to his feet, spitting out blood. Gingerly he touched his ripped up and swelling lips and winced as his fingers felt the beaten flesh. Disgust rose up in him as the taste of dirt and grains swiveled in his mouth from the boot there moments ago. He spit again and looked towards Zine. The woman was already getting up again. Naruto's felt his own anger rise. He wouldn't let her treat him like trash again. I know enough about him. Fuji is a greedy man, Zine. Just like you. He didn't like that you wanted me more than him. He didn't want to be second best. He wanted to fuck the women and then come home to you. He had a chance to grab a shitload of money. A chance to be with a woman more attractive than you who found him attractive. And he took it. You're just the trash he left behind. Naruto pronounced loudly. Zine snarled as she brushed back her hair and moved her hands into the beginning of a seal. Trash. You're the one who slept in the streets before I found you. You're the one who had to scrounge around for food like the filthy animal you are. I saved you and gave you a home. If anyone's the trash around here, it's you. I'm better than you in every way. Zine declared in a near hysterical voice. Her hands finished the last hand sign. Earth began to rise up from the cracks in the wood and formed a wall that hid Zine from view. Earth-style, moving wall, Zine screamed. Naruto's eyes widened as the entire earth wall suddenly catapulted in his direction. He threw his head back and screamed, throwing Kyuubi's chakra in front of him as a shield, against the oncoming boulder. The red chakra slammed against heavy rock, slowing the monstrosity down and cracking it to pieces. but the pressure of air caused by the catapulted rock still crashed into Naruto with enough force to send him sprawling into the main room. Naruto rolled with the hit and came up in a low crouch, red eyes glowing ominously in the large, shadowed room. Naruto moved quickly, his tired muscles fueled by demonic chakra, and hid behind one of the many huge pillars holding the third floor up. His eyes roamed the back part of the room he'd landed in. He knew, from what the third told him, that this room used to host parties for a great many important diplomats during its time, including the Uzumaki clan. Naruto placed his hands into a hand sign and whispered softly as the sound of footsteps echoed in the air. Zine walked through the door's opening while casually wiping away a trail of blood from her cheek where she landed from the chakra wave. Come out from wherever you are," Zine trilled lazily. "You manipulated me into a blood contract I couldn't break because I was young, scared and defenseless." Naruto's voice echoed around her. Zine turned to the left, where she could tell the echo originated from, and smiled sweetly. "The offer was a choice. You could have easily not come to me," Zine answered, hands falling into a seal in front of her. "The choice was you or death. You raped me and beat me for your own pleasure and enjoyed my pain. And you think of yourself as a good patriot because even though you put me through hell I was still alive? You call me a demon because of Kyuubi, but don't fool yourself, you're the real monster," Naruto told her in a surprisingly steady voice. Her grin only widened as she finished her seals. "Earth-style raps," Zine whispered. A surprised yelp echoed in the empty ballroom. Zine walked slowly over to the pillar and around it. Ropes made of dirt and held by chakra bound his hands and legs to the rotting floor. A new gaping hole lay directly in front of him from where she dragged and forced the earth up from 3 stories below. Let it never be said that she was a weak kunoichi. Her smile grew into full-blown laughter. "Ha ha 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 ha. You still think you're human, don't you? How pathetic. You have a demon breathing under your skin that lusts for blood. Even if at one point the sacrifice to seal the monster away was human, it is no longer true. You are nothing but a jail cell that the demon vents itself through," Zine informed her young blonde victim. Naruto struggled for a moment before pausing and looking up into Zine's cold brown eyes with his own icy blue. "You know something? I've known you for quite a few years now and I gotta say you've been losing it more and more as time goes on. You just keep getting more psychotic and fucked up. It's no wonder your husband left you. I honestly don't know how he's been able to stand you up till now," Naruto told the woman above him with a grin just before going up in smoke. "Shadow clone?" Zine hissed angrily. The woman twisted around, eyes darting from side to side, even as the dirt fell to nothing behind her. "What's wrong, Zine? Don't want to hear the truth? Losing your temper?" Naruto's voice whispered from several different directions. Red eyes flashed in the darkness from pillar to pillar as Zine's fury continued to rise. "When our contract first began you were nothing but a hopeless little creature that yearned for any kind of affection. You were pathetic," Zine yelled out. Zine charged towards a movement in the shadows and gripped a clone by the throat. Lifting it a foot into the air, she viciously slammed it against one of the pillars. It dissipated in a cloud of smoke. "You leaned into my touch and ate up the attention like you do everything else. A chubby little whore that would have done anything for someone to give you even the littlest attention. You enjoyed our time together," Zine yelled out as she moved further into the room. "You're right. No one had ever wanted to touch me before you. No one hugged me or held me when I cried. I never sat in anyone's lap like the other children. Old man Hokage was the only person who didn't flinch when I came near, but he's the leader of a village and didn't have any time to spend with me." Naruto's voice drifted from Zine's right. "I was terrified of you. I hated you, but at the same time you were also the closest thing I had to a mother. You were the closest thing I had to family. But that being said, it only shows how utterly pathetic and alone I was. More than that though, it shows how desperate and fucked up you were to take advantage of me." Naruto's voice drifted from Zine's left and up further into the room. "Face it, you and Fuji didn't get bored having sex, it was just him. He didn't want to fuck you anymore. And that's all it ever was. He never loved you and that's what messed you up. It wasn't the missions that did it. It was coming home to someone that didn't give a fuck about you." Naruto's emotionless voice whispered out from behind her. Zine snarled. "I'm tired of this game. This ends now. Zine breathed out as her hands weaved almost elegantly from one hand seal to the next. Water style. Floodgate. Zine whispered as she breathed in the condensation from the very air. As Zine breathed out, a flood of water spewed out, sending 2 feet of water to vacate every inch of the rotting ballroom's floor. Zine hurriedly moved into the next series of hand seals as to make use of the water before it all leaked out of cracks and holes. Naruto's voice once more drifted to her from all around. So you decided to take out all your frustrations on someone who was worse off than you. You wanted me to feel worse than you, more worthless than you, because it made you feel better. She finished the last hand seal. She'd wipe out every one of those voices. You're so messed up that just going out and having sex with a man wasn't good enough for you. No. You wanted to feel superior. You wanted someone who was hurting and alone so that you could control them. Every aspect of them. Naruto's voice drifted from 12 different places. Earth style. Mud sea serpents. Zine called out. The water sloshed violently once before turning to muddy brown goo. Serpents' heads raised out of the mud to hiss and scurry in the brown depths. Zine grinned from directly in the middle of her beautiful creatures. The sound of popping could be heard as her serpents sought and destroyed each of her prey. Ah! A scream of pain sounded from near the window. Zine chuckled. So that was your plan. Distract me and make your way to the window. Smart, Zine admitted. Naruto breathed out through his nose as he tried to ignore the large serpent whose rock-like teeth were sunk into his side. Blood leaked heavily through Iruka's brown shirt, making a blotch of maroon appear. The brown serpent was wound tightly around his left leg and waist. He stood balancing atop the mud with chakra in an effort to not make noise. Naruto cursed the rusted lock that had stalled him enough for the serpent to get him. Zine walked toward Naruto, clucking her tongue against the front of her teeth in disapproval. You think you know me so well, yet after all these years you still believe you had a chance to get away from me? Zine asked incredulously. Naruto paled as Zine moved her hands into the tiger seal and whispered softly an activation key. Neisei Raimi ya Gante. I still want to have some fun before I kill you. Then I'll hunt down my dear Fuji and that bitch of his and teach them a lesson as well. Zine explained. Naruto screamed in pain as the torture seal over his heart was activated. If it weren't for the serpent curled around his leg holding him in place, he would have most likely fallen to his knees. His body temperature spiked as his chakra began to bend to Zine's will. Naruto gasped, clutching the place over his heart, and pressed his hand against the glass behind him to brace himself. He paused though, when he felt the old glass strain under the small pressure, and tried to calm himself. Zine continued toward him, oblivious to what he was thinking, her eyes roaming the ballroom's old yet touchingly beautiful walls. The walls were covered from head to toe in artwork, and though still a marvel to look at, they had long since begun to fade and chip away. Only the few strands of sunlight illuminating from the 2 medium-sized circle windows gave the smallest view of them in the shadowy darkness. You spent quite a bit of winter holed up in this trash heap, Zine observed casually. Naruto chanced a peep outside the window behind him. He'd planned on using chakra to run down the side of this old building, but with the lock rusted shut he would be forced to break through the glass to get through. Unfortunately, the momentum for such a thing would send him too far away from the wall to attach himself to it. If he increased his somehow, then maybe he could get to the building stationed nearly 30 feet across from them. Naruto's eyes widened before he smirked. Zine's voice interrupted his thoughts, startling him. I could always spare you, you know. If you disobey me, I will use the seal to kill you. Come with me and stay by my side and I'll let you live. You know as well as I do that there is nothing you can do, but take my offer. Zine whispered. There was a trace of something in her voice that startled him. It was hope. Naruto shook his head. He would never go with her. The hope in her eyes died and a sneer replaced it. Why? Zine snapped. Naruto looked into Zine's eyes, and for the first time in the 3 years he'd known her, he felt sorry for her. She was truly confused as to why he wouldn't want to go with her. Why he would give up his life to be away from her. She was utterly alone in the world now. She understood his own desperation as a child and didn't even know it. Because now I know what it's like to have something to live for and you're not it, Naruto told her just before crashing through the window behind him. He knew and understood that he didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of living, But if that knowledge stopped him from trying, then he would have given up on life a long time ago. Naruto twisted his body as he dropped, the serpent hissing angrily at him even as it disintegrated into nothing more than dirt. He threw his hands out in front of him towards the crumbling building and pumped chakra into his palms. Rotation and power. The first two parts of the Rasengan burst from his palms to make a powerful force. The air twisted into wind like cyclones and pushed his body backwards. As the cyclone force faded from his palms, Naruto leaned back to see a fire escape fast approaching. Bending his body even further back, he turned the free fall into a back flip before twisting to the right so that he faced the black bars head on. His chest and arms collided with it harsh enough that his very bones jarred painfully in rebellion. As his body began to move with gravity towards the ground below, Naruto's hands grasped tightly to the fire escape and his legs dangled off its edge beneath him. It wasn't graceful, but it had worked, damn it. He'd fallen down the length of 2 fire escapes with 3 beneath him. The old Uzumaki diplomatic building had been designed with much higher ceilings than the surrounding buildings, so even though he'd been on the 3rd floor of its building, in actuality he was 5 stories up. Naruto breathed in a shaky breath. He lowered himself so that his whole body dangled before dropping down to the fire escape's handlebar below. His feet expertly balanced on its inch-thin frame as he looked down at the next one. He swung down to the last fire escape and easily landed the last 12 feet to the ground. Naruto covered his mouth as a series of deep coughs racked his body. The seal would be taking full effect in a few minutes. That meant he would have to act fast. Naruto stood up and looked around to find the closest exit. "You're really beginning to irritate me, Naruto," Zain's voice announced. Naruto spun around to see Zain's silky black hair slightly ruffled as she stood at the alley's exit. Naruto felt his entire body sag. He would pass out the moment he stopped using his demonic chakra. He knew that with the seal activated he couldn't keep using it though. The seal was designed to use the chakra running through his body to burn his insides, and with Kyuubi's chakra being in his system at the moment. "You hate it when I fight back. That's why you went to such an extent to make sure that I never could," Naruto stated softly as the woman advanced on him. "My offer still stands," Zain pleaded. "I can have you all to myself and you can have anything you want." Zain added. "I won't let you control me anymore. I won't let you hurt me. I won't do this any longer," Naruto answered. "You can't escape me. The only way you'll ever be able to get away from me is through death," Zain said as her hands moved into a seal. "I know. Dying is better than being chained to you. I can't fight you anymore. I can't live like this anymore. The consolation for me is that I'll be the one to give that final blow to you," Naruto said as a small smile flittered across his sharpened canines. Zain paused in the second seal. "What are you talking about?" she asked suspiciously. "You're all alone, Zain. Your husband's gone and you have no friends. The only thing of importance in your life still is me," Naruto explained to her patiently. "That's why you offered me a chance to live, isn't it?" Naruto's voice was almost kind in its coldness. "I have friends and I can have any man I want," Zain denied. She moved into the 3rd seal. "Everyone that knows you is afraid of you. Anyone that talks to you is weary and waiting. They know you're fucked up in the head, Zain. I've heard them talk about you. I'm the only one you have left that isn't afraid of you," Naruto informed her quietly, challengingly. "Why aren't you? I'm killing you, beating you, fucking you while you scream. How can you not be afraid of me?" Zain screamed in near hysterics as she finished the last seal. She was terrified of the answer he would give. "Earth style, living tile," Zain cried out, lifting her left arm above her head. What sounded like thousands of pieces of glass breaking filled the air from up above. Zain's mouth was twisted into an almost insane smile, eyes wide and bright with delight. Naruto looked up to see the roof tiles ripping themselves from the roof and dangling in the air. Zain moved her left arm downward, and with the movement the sharp square pieces began to spin and descend at an alarming rate. Naruto dodged the first 2 that tried to split his head open, but wasn't fast enough to miss a third that sliced deep into his shoulder. Naruto bit his lip and forced back his darkening vision to avoid another 5 deadly tiles. He couldn't dodge all of them, but he could manage missing the more deadly projectiles. He lurched forward just in time to miss one that would have separated his arm from his body and almost fell to the ground when one pierced his extremely sensitive whisker marks. The pain that shot up from them being ripped open nearly rivaled the serpent bite in his side. The tiles seemed endless. Naruto grunted as a spinning tile skimmed his back and another pierced his left leg. "That's enough," Naruto screamed out, throwing out a demonic wave of chakra. The tiles blew away from his body, breaking and shattering against the walls on either side of him. Unfortunately, the act sped up the rush of chakra through his system. Naruto screamed in pain as the demonic chakra began to eat away at his insides and his vision blacked out on him for a moment. He fell to his knees in front of Zain, who seemed enthralled by the prospect of watching him wither on the ground. "Not yet. I'm not gonna let her kill me before I tell her," Naruto thought determinedly. Naruto bared his fangs at her, forcing his body to stand up despite the agony the action caused him. "I hate you so much," Naruto grit out. Zain frowned at him, her eyes narrowed into slits. "I hate you with every ounce of my heart. I wish I could kill you, have dreamt of it even," Naruto admitted. His body wavered. He could feel the right side of his body tipping. "When you beat me, I'm not afraid of the next hit. I'm thinking about how much I want to hurt you in return." Zain took a step back at the sheer anger and hurt that radiated off of the one in front of her. "When you tell me how worthless I am, I'm not afraid of what you're gonna say next. I'm thinking about how I want to crush your windpipe." Hot tears leaked out and slid down his cheeks, mixing with warm blood. "When you activate the torture seal on my heart, I'm not afraid of how long it's gonna last. I'm thinking about how much I want to take a kunai and stab it in your chest over and over again. Just so you know how it feels." He couldn't hold his arms up any longer, could barely feel them. "When you hold me down and fuck me, I'm not afraid of you. I'm trying to figure out how to kill you." This is what he wanted. He wanted her to know how much hatred he had for her. How much she'd hurt him. "I hate you so much and for so long that there's no longer any fear left to feel. My hatred for you has overwhelmed any weariness or fear in your presence." He wanted her to know that he would never choose her over death again. He wanted her to know how worthless she was now. "I'm the only purpose you have left in this world, and taking that away from you will be more satisfying than anything else I could ever do to you." Naruto confessed all this to her, and it felt so empowering. Even as the torture seal continued to bear down on his body, she could no longer touch his soul. Naruto slumped down. Kyuubi's chakra was finally fading from his system. "You're wrong. You mean nothing to me. It's you that depends on me to exist. My every word dictates your life. You belong to me," Zain cried out with laughter. Hysterical laughter. She'd gotten her answer to the question she'd been searching for a long time. She was the demon. If even a monster couldn't love her, then she was unlovable. That was what she'd feared and become. Garuko urged his legs to move faster. He could smell him. A trail of medical herbs, ramen, and the distinct scent of fox. People made indignant yelps as he brushed by them. Ninja turned their heads wearily as one of Kakashi's dogs rushed by as if chasing a rouge. Woman screeched dramatically about an animal running loose. He didn't care. Naruto was miles away from him still. Kyuubi's power was incredible. He hadn't felt its presence since the bridge during the fight with Zabuza. It didn't matter how fast the kid was though, cause he could track him. Garuko weaved between two fat men and vehemently ignored an orange cat sitting lazily on one of the market's countertops. He moved so fast that his feet barely touched the ground. Leaping onto a stack of crates, Garuko moved to the rooftops. Garuko sniffed the air again. Guy was finally up and following them, but still quite far bit away. It was only bad luck that the skilled shinobi slammed his thick skull against the tree of all things. He wished he could have waited for the spandex-wearing Junin, but the dog had a horrible foreboding. His headache was back full swing, and every few minutes an image would hit him enough to stop him in his tracks before it would suddenly and unexplainably disappear again. Garuko entered the bad side of town. The dog followed the trail through back alleys and rat-infested streets. Yet he moved still further. Bars turned into foreclosed homes. Saloons turned into burnt-down restaurants. He'd entered the part of the village that had long since been due for demolition and hadn't yet because of insufficient funds. The smell was stronger now. Garuko stopped on top of an old crumbling building and sniffed the air. Naruto was down in the alleyway below. The dog leapt off the roof and onto the next with chakra-padded paws to soften the landing. He was fully healed now. Garuko moved to the front of the building and easily moved down the side of it to land safely on an old overhang. He jumped down and moved to the mouth of the alleyway Naruto was in. The first thing he saw was a rather beautiful woman with features twisted into an insane smile. A shudder ran down the dog's spine. Her silky black hair just touched her shoulders and steely brown eyes stared focused ahead. She wasn't paying him any attention whatsoever. That's when it happened. A smell entered his nose. Early morning grass, dew still on the blades, with just the barest hint of peaches. His headache exploded. Image after image raced through his mind. A bar, the beautiful woman, a broad-shouldered man holding Naruto by the throat, an old but elegant-looking house. Things he'd never seen, people he'd never met. Garuko was no longer in the alleyway on the darker side of town, but instead drifting through darkness. White glowing symbols surrounded him, but as the dog peered closer he could tell that they were cracking fast. What is this? Garuko barked angrily. His fur stood on end as images began to appear, half-formed images and situations, things he didn't recognize but felt familiar. Then Naruto appeared, but it wasn't the Naruto he knew. He was dressed in a black t-shirt and general black pants. Tears streamed down his face, yet his eyes seemed icy. Gashes and bruises littered his frame and there were a few rips in his clothing. There was one other thing that was different. Naruto wasn't solid. The images that surrounded Garuko seemed to be coming from the translucent blonde. No more than that, they seemed to make up his body. They were swirling around him and shifting in him. With each shift an image would grow bright and that part of him would be highlighted. The cracked symbols twisted around him like chains and spread out until they touched every corner of the dark place Garuko found himself in. There was a cracking sound. Garuko looked in its direction to see one of the symbols crumble, and with it a large group of shifting images slipped away from Naruto's form, causing him to dim. "Naruto!" Garuko shouted. The dog ran up to the image that smiled down at him through his tears. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Image Naruto's voice echoed throughout the cavern-like space. "Sorry for what? What is this?" Garuko half whined, half yelled. Another symbol shattered. "I'm sorry. Just don't try to remember." Once more Image Naruto's voice echoed. "Remember what?" the dog demanded. A chain of symbols collapsed around them. "Shush, just go to sleep, Garuko. Kakashi will be back soon and your headaches will go away. They won't ever bother you again," Image Naruto said softly. "I don't want to go to sleep," Garuko growled ferociously. 3 symbols fell to pieces before disappearing. "Please, Garuko, it's better this way," Image Naruto declared sadly. More images fell away from Naruto's body, causing the blonde's shoulder to disappear. "What's happening to you?" Garuko whimpered as he moved forward. More symbols crumbled. "Garuko, don't come closer. Just turn around and this will stop happening. Kakashi's in that direction. He needs you to go to him," Image Naruto said. "Answer me, what is this? What is it you don't want me to remember?" Garuko demanded. 4 of the chains crashed to the ground, their shattered remnants flying in all directions. Image Naruto's legs dispersed, the images freeing themselves and tugging playfully with the last chains. "Your life will be much harder if you don't stop. It's easier to forget and live on." The echo of Image Naruto's words were softer now. "I want to remember. Tell me what it is that I've forgotten," Garuko screamed. The last of the chains ripped apart, their broken remains falling to the ground and littering the dark floor like glowing pieces of glass. The image of Naruto smiled regretfully down at Garuko as it began to unravel. The memory seal broken. "You've forgotten me. I am what you need to remember." And just like that the image of Naruto was gone, leaving shimmering memories behind. For a moment the dark cavern was silent, the glowing pieces almost tragic, but only for a moment. The room exploded with light and sound as all the memories swirled around the wolf-like dog, their pieces clattering against each other as they all attempted to enter him at once. Pain erupted against his skull. Garuko howled in pain, and then cried in understanding. "I'm not talking to him. It would make things a lot easier if you would." Kakashi gave him a tired but understanding smile. "Naruto talks to everyone whether they can hear or understand him anyway. You have to remember that Naruto's been alone all his life. I often find him talking to himself while he trains just to fill the air with noise. I think it's just his way of trying not to feel too lonely." Kakashi spoke to him quietly. He, so you don't like me either, huh? That's okay, not many people do, or animals I suppose in your case. Naruto gave Garuko a large fake smile. So, would you rather the bed or the floor? Naruto asked jokingly. He smirked and jumped on the bed. He, I gave that to you, didn't I? Shush, it's not a big deal. It happens 2 or 3 times a week. I'm not dying or in any kind of danger from it. Just a lot of pain. Nothing I can't handle. Naruto told him gently. I never eat breakfast. Naruto said simply. Somehow it bothered him. Kyuubi will be able to heal this, so either way you'll live. However, he won't be able to heal it in time for you to avoid a few weeks in the hospital. Then you'll be behind in your bills again. That wouldn't be very nice now, would it? Hospital bills, rent and other things. A beautiful woman with silky black hair stood menacingly above an injured Naruto. Garuko felt infuriated. She smelled like early morning grass with a hint of peaches. Why exactly are you suddenly playing mute? Hana's angry eyes bore down on him accusingly. What am I supposed to do? Should I cook some rice to bring over? Should I try to find something nice to wear? Is there something I'm supposed to do beforehand? No one's ever invited me to spend time with them before. Naruto demanded in a panicked voice. I told myself that they'd come for me if something bad happened. It helped me sleep at night, you know. I know it's stupid and I shouldn't have, but I wanted them to knock on my door this morning to see if I was okay. I know that's stupid and selfish. Naruto admitted calmly, but his hands were shaking. Sometimes I pretend that they care as much about me as I do them. He flinched at Naruto's words. Besides, I take up a lot more time than the others cause they're a lot smarter than me. They get stuff faster, so it's easy for Kaka-sensei to teach them something quick and then go on another mission. I understand he doesn't have time to show me something. I know he gets frustrated when he's explaining stuff to me. Not as if it's the first time I've been told I'm too stupid to teach. He felt arms tighten around him as Naruto drew him closer. I knew you were just being a drama queen. Naruto told him teasingly as they sat together at Team 7's training ground. God, I hate this job. He heard Naruto's worn-out voice mutter in the back of the bar. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Naruto brokenly whispered through tears as Naruto buried his face into his fur. What are you sorry for? A scent familiar to him entered his nose. A smell of early morning grass with a hint of peaches mixed in with forced sex and ash that mingled with the aroma of sushi. 2 humans had done it. He couldn't place it, but he knew the next time he smelled it he would rip them apart. Please, I don't want anyone to know. Everyone. They already think I'm useless. I don't want them to think I couldn't handle that. I don't want them to know what happened. Naruto begged him, tears at the corner of his eyes. Don't you ever think something like that was your fault? I talked to Tsunade-sama, the new Hokage, and she's gonna take me on as her student. Sakura cried out happily. Sadness filled him as he looked at Naruto's stunned face. Sakura stole something from Naruto without even knowing it. Garuko whined and cried all morning to go with me, so I brought him to shut him up. I did not whine, I demanded with dignity. Naruto smiled at him and he was relieved to find it was a real one. It's all right. I know why we didn't celebrate it. My birthday's also the day that Kakashi's sensei died. You know, the whole Kyuubi attacking the village and got sealed into me thing? Naruto laughed, but it was hollow. You work 3 different jobs. You're exhausted all the time, no matter how hard you try to hide it. I can see it. I have never failed a mission because I was tired. I've completed all the assignments given to Team 7 and I've only missed training every once in a great while. What happens during my own free time is my business and no one else's. I don't care about the stupid missions. Naruto, you can't keep doing this to yourself. It's not right that your rent is so high and that the only things you can afford to eat is rice and ramen. It's not right that a 13-year-old works at a bar to make ends meet. The world isn't a nice place. You either have to grow up or die, and I decided that I slightly like living. An argument held in the middle of the forest. Hurt and angry against defensive. Naruto against him. Aren't you going to eat? He watched Naruto grimace. It's already 6:20. I'll eat something when I get back. I paid a lot of money for it. Put a lot of thought into what I wanted. When I opened the box and pulled this out, the shopkeeper purposely designed it to look like a clown's clothes. He looked me straight in the eyes and told me he hoped it would kill me on a mission, that an enemy nin would find me an easy target. Naruto's voice sounded so resigned that it hurt. I'm a comrade, a fellow shinobi that they feel obligated to protect because I'm not good enough to do it myself. I think that's the difference between a comrade and a friend. A comrade is someone who you work with and protect because you have to. A friend is someone you're with because you want to be with them and protect because they're precious to you. I'm here for you. I'm your friend. And it was the absolute truth. He would be Naruto's friend no matter what happened. So, how'd I look? Like shit. Sometimes lying is nicer. And look where it's gotten you. Something happened though, I don't know what, but something happened. Naruto was already the smallest kid in class, but he started losing weight. His body started showing physical signs of sickness. The scariest part was that Naruto never said anything about it. With fear lacing his voice, Choji told Shika and, unknowingly, him of the academy days. Are you alright? Fine. You want to talk about it? No. Alright, I'll be here if you do. Thank you. And he meant every word. What's this about heart damage? Naruto's had heart damage since he was very young. He felt his own heart clench as warm fingers ran through his hair. Garuko, I'm going to go take a shower, alright? Fine, just don't take too long. Shizune will be here in an hour. Naruto wasn't in the shower. In fact, he was still fully dressed, his jacket the only article missing, laying on top of the toilet seat. The blonde had his back against the tub with his legs sprawled out in front of him. That wasn't what Garuko was staring at though. Naruto's face was struck with pure horror as Garuko caught him in the act. From his elbow down 6 long inches sat a row of deep bloody cuts, some could be considered gashes, on his right arm. Naruto's left hand held a sharp, blood-covered razor frozen in the midst of cutting another jagged line into his right arm. Naruto moved before he could even blink. Blue-tipped fingers stretched out and touched his forehead. The last thing he heard was the continued buzzing of an alarm clock accidentally set wrong. Then half-remembered words floating above him. A man with short, light blonde hair standing above him with a greedy twinkle in his eyes, pupilless blue eyes. He smelt a small trace of bloody as a seal was drawn on his forehead by the man above him. He couldn't move though, couldn't even really see. Then the image wavered and a hot, not painful, but unpleasant shot of chakra ended all awareness. He remembered everything.